the everyday Hogwarts player. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 551, The Thief Krum. Ron got out of the car anyway. However, this time he did not actually go to see Lavender. It wasn't that he hadn't found her. It was because of a piece of news that made him return to the carriage in a daze. It was 10 minutes ago that Ron learned from Angelina that the Lavender and Paddle sisters were in that carriage. Love to me in a letter. Isn't this a good thing? I don't think that Ron is right for you at all. We have been on the train for such a long time, but he hasn't come over yet. The conversation between the two seemed like a bolt from the blue. Ron didn't bother to listen any further and quickly left this sad place. Krum is undoubtedly a traitor. In the original world line, he fell in love with Hermione, who was already in love with Ron, and Ginny, who was still in touch with Harry. If Harry wasn't as arrogant as Ron, he would have stepped in directly to cut off the possibility of Krum and Ginny knowing each other. I guess Krum is going to pursue Ginny again. Moreover, in the original description, it seems that there are more than just Hermione and Ginny. He once said to Harry, who was pretending to be Ron's relative, Alice, all the pretty girls are already taken. What's the point of being an international star, you? No, Krum is an international star who has no shortage of girls. There has been no shortage of beautiful witches to pursue. This means something that Krum himself may not even be aware of. He prefers girls who are already taken. But then I thought that it was an unintentional mistake on his person, and it just happened that the he liked already had someone who liked him. So we can only call him the seed of CAO thief, rather than CAO thief. But perhaps, after years of frustration, he will eventually realize this and let go of the shackles of morality. Take the initiative to attack and become a real CAO thief? Who can say for sure? While in Diagon Alley, Lavender actually didn't know Krum's purpose at all first. Her best friend had always advised her and Ron to reconcile rather than break up. So she deliberately concealed the secret that Lavender had a boyfriend. Before this, Lavender had always thought that Krum came to her to get to know Harry and the others and to learn English. She also thought Krum knew Ron was her boyfriend. That's why I kept in touch with her through letters. In the letter he mentioned that Harry and the others were his friends. He didn't know the inside story. He flinched at the name of Krum, his idol compared with international stars. How could Lavender like him, an ordinary second-generation official, especially since I've been on the train for so long and I haven't gone to see her yet? So he retreated so quickly that he didn't hear Lavender's next words. This Krum is not reliable at all. He knew that I had Ron, but he still confessed to me he wouldn't think that we British girls are so casual, would he? An international star, conquer others with just a hook? He even calls himself Ron's friend. Ron was very anxious about this and the others discovered something was wrong. What's wrong? Did Lavender dump you? Ginny asked bluntly. Ron agreed without hesitation. This made Harry and Neville swallow all the questions they wanted to ask. Ginny's jaw also grew larger as if it had been dislocated. She was just making fun of Ron on a daily basis. I want him to pay more attention to his relationship with Lavender stronger than Ron's love for her. Why did it become deformed? When Ginny was doubting her life, Ron clenched his fists and said gloomily, "It's Krum, he knows Lavender." He confessed his love to her in the letter. The key point is, has Lavender agreed? Ginny, who didn't believe it, asked quickly me. Ron said with his head down. Crystal clear liquid slid down his chin and dripped onto the carpet. Ginny couldn't bear it anymore. She pushed Harry away and stood up. He looked at Ron deeply and scolded, "Enough. Ron Weasley. Lavender is not the vain girl you think she is. Krum is your idol, not hers. We have all met Krum. His dignity is not at all to our English girls' taste. As for Parvati, it is normal for her to behave like this as a best friend. She always thought you were just playing around with Lavender. And Lavender wants to be with you for life." Harry, who was pushed away, wondered if it was a misunderstanding. Because he felt that Krum was not that kind of person. Neville felt the same way. However, in this situation, both of them kept their mouths shut. "Really?" Ron asked tremblingly. "Sure. Yeah, that's it." Harry and Neville began to agree. Ginny continued to look disappointed. "All right. Ron Weasley. If you are still a man, go and ask it yourself. Don't feel sorry for yourself here. If Lavender really doesn't want you anymore, I will help you get her back. You have to know that you are the son of the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Harry's friend, the inventor of the mist bottle, and a newly rich man. And Krum was just a Quidditch player. Is he as good a seeker as Harry? But Ron laughed at himself and said, what if? What if I can't get it back? I thought about this on the way back. I certainly didn't love her as much as Lavender loved me. I went to see her just now because I was bored. You know, I'm her boyfriend. But sometimes, being with her was not even as fun as being with Harry. Such a long summer vacation passed and I just wrote letters to her. Maybe she had already met Krum several times this summer. Maybe you've even experienced something unforgettable. This is based on reality. I've heard that Alpheus Doge of the Order of the Phoenix had a 7-year relationship with Dumbledore and I, but in just one summer vacation and a graduation trip, Dumbledore and Grindelwald got together and she never married for his sake. Chapter 552, Lavender takes the initiative. In the afternoon, it started to rain, and the outlines of the continuous hills outside the window became blurred. At this time, they heard footsteps in the corridor again and he quickly hid in the corner. Ginny sat near the door of the carriage, using her thin body to block any direction from which Ron might attack Harry. As for Ron, he didn't notice any of this. He was just regretting it. He realized now how much Lavender meant to him. Neville, the only sovereign one, suggested, why don't we ask a female classmate we know to help ask? It was that he felt more comfortable and happy with his friendship with Harry than with love. Harry, let's go out for a walk. By the way, go ask Lavender what's going on. Ginny quickly pulled Harry up. She felt that now was the best opportunity to get Harry away from Ron for a while. And as long as the relationship between Ron and Lavender is repaired. Ron, who has a girlfriend, has no time to think about Harry too. He has secured Ron and Lavender's love. Even Merlin can't. I said so. Ron, if Lavender really chooses Krum, tell her that I am sorry to her. I have always been immature and failed to realize her importance. Forget it. It's unclear whether she'll be willing to listen. Ginny and Harry, this must be a misunderstanding. We will definitely deal with Lavender. Otherwise we won't come back. Ron suddenly raised his head. Does your not coming back mean that Lavender really likes Krum? Fair enough. At least I don't hear bad news. I am going to sleep first. Ron quickly closed his eyes. He pretended to take a nap just like Neville did. An hour passed and the train continued to head north, and the rain was getting heavier. The window panes were a thick, sticky gray now, and it deepened until the lights in the corridor and on the luggage racks came on the windows. The wind howled, but Ron slept. In the carriage, Neville didn't dare to speak. He was just thinking about one thing. Could it be that Lavender really fell in love with Krum? Because until now, Harry and the others have not returned. On the other side, Harry and the others haven't returned yet. It was all because of two things. First, they forgot to ask Ron which car Lavender was in. The second is that Harry and the others forgot how popular they are. World Line is much more famous than the one in the original World Line. Anyone who knows his deeds will have to admit that he is a well-deserved savior. And Harry had just gotten engaged. The now engaged couple appeared in the passage outside the carriage. It is conceivable how many wizards will surround them. Heroes of the Order of the Phoenix, come to your engagement? Did the great Mad-Eye Moody really have a pair of magical eyes that could see through things? Can you really command magical creatures like in Summoning Kingdom? Did the Weird Sisters, the most famous band in the British wizarding world, named after sisters, but all members are actually male, really invite you to become a member of them? Is this true? Harry Potter, have you become a wolf wizard? That's why you can fly so well. At the moment, Harry and Ginny were still stuck in the corridor of the train. There were wizards all around who were interested in Harry and they asked all sorts of strange questions. Harry was sure that he had received no invitations from the Weird Sisters, the England Quidditch team, or the so-called WWN. All he knew about the three was that the Weird Sisters were a band. Ludo Bagman was once the ace of the England Quidditch team until he was caught gambling in his first year. But he had never listened to it. And most importantly, weren't the Order of the Phoenix and Ron the only ones who knew about his summoning of the Pluto dragon? Even if Lupin's werewolf identity is exposed, he can still safely continue to be the assistant professor of defense against the dark arts at Hogwarts. However, none of these could stop his inner distress. Just now, his good brother Ron confessed to him. The only thing he had to do now, find Lavender and clear up the misunderstanding with her, was impossible to do. Make way, we are looking for Lavender. Does anyone know which carriage she is in? Ginny at the side couldn't help but ask directly. At this time, A familiar voice came from the crowd. "It's me, make way. It's me, Ginny. Lavender. I finally found you." Ginny hugged Lavender happily. After searching for such a long time and even being pestered with many questions, when she was about to despair, Lavender unexpectedly showed up, escaping from the crowd. On the way back to the carriage, Lavender began to tell the story of how she and Krum met. After she finished her story, she paused. He frowned again and said, "That bastard Krum said he still knows you. I was worried that he might say something to Ron that would hurt our relationship. Ron hasn't come to see me yet. Maybe this is one of the reasons." Harry coughed violently. "After much thought, I decided to go find Ron myself. And then I met you guys." Harry heaved a sigh of relief when he heard this. "That's great. I'll just say it. Also, Ron is not what you think. He looked for you. But when he found your compartment, he heard Krum's words of courtship." And then, Ginny, who was standing by, felt relieved and said rudely, "Lavender, you don't know. Krum also has another identity, Ron's idol. When he heard that Krum was pursuing you, he became so scared, he ran back in shame. In my opinion, he deserves it. If he had opened the door and talked it out with you, there wouldn't be so much trouble. Roro, he's not a grave finder. Ravenclaws tend to overthink things." Lavender breathed a sigh of relief and waved her hand nonchalantly. She even blushed with pleasure as she spoke, as if she was happy that Ron cared about her. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 553, The Strange Case of Riddle and Dumbledore. Favor is something that cannot be controlled. Just like Neville had the girl on the Iron Throne in his heart at first sight, Lavender fell in love with Ron immediately. Ryan felt that Ron was really lucky to meet a good girl like Lavender. Otherwise, under Ryan's occasional hypnosis, he would have become a special bisexual who likes girls and Harry. However, Krum's incident this time was not initiated by Ryan. He also didn't expect Krum to fall in love with Lavender at first. Just like in the original world line, he fell in love with Hermione at first sight. Perhaps Krum and Ron were born to clash. He originally thought that this guy Krum might take a fancy to Hermione again. He had prepared 100 ways to deal with Krum. But things did not develop as Ryan expected. Ryan thought Krum was lucky. And Ron was unlucky. Because although Krum has the buff of falling easily in love with other people's girlfriends and having other people in his heart, he is very loyal. After he falls in love with one witch, he will no longer be able to gaze at the beauty of others unless he knew that Hermione had a boyfriend like in the original world line. He would move on to the next target. The problem now is that Lavender thought Krum knew she had a boyfriend after talking with Parvati. They both started to think so because of the information gap. Even if she found Ron to talk it out, it was very likely that she would still not be able to come to a clear conclusion about whether Krum knew that she had a boyfriend. Unless she met Krum in person, or Lavender wrote back to Krum directly and angrily accused him of having a boyfriend. Otherwise, this misunderstanding will probably continue. Ron still gets bothered by it. Because Ron's biggest weakness is inferiority complex. No matter how outstanding he is, this problem, which was developed from not being noticed in his childhood, has always been lurking in the shadow of his heart. Well, Ryan just happened to observe it now. In the carriage, after finding out what had happened, Ron smiled again. But his face remained pale. If you don't look at his hair and freckles, you might think he is from the Malfoy family. He didn't return to normal even when the train arrived. It seems that today's rainy weather caused all this pouring down. Ryan, who was still sitting in the carriage with Hermione and Luna at the end of the carriage, raised his eyebrows. I didn't expect that this cold wave had nothing to do with Dementors. Today in the original world line, the platform was also frozen. But at that time, because Sirius escaped from Azkaban, the Ministry of Magic arranged for Dementors to be stationed at Hogwarts. Ryan shook his head and waved his hand. A gray film flashed by and passed through the bodies of the three people. The next second, they appeared in the magnificent auditorium. But now there was no sea of pointed black hats in the auditorium, and each long table was empty. In the faculty seats, except for Professor McGonagall and Hagrid, Dumbledore and other professors were also sitting quietly. They did not notice at all that three figures appeared at the Ravenclaw table below, even though Luna and Hermione were watching them openly. Hermione looked around after a moment. Then he looked at Ryan and said loudly without any reservation, "There are 3 more long tables. Are they for the other 3 schools? But why are there no other professors on the faculty table? Ryan, didn't you say that professors from other schools were here? Except for Boxplittons, there's nothing to say. Expelliarmus was a tree shepherd, and Durmstrang came directly to Grindelwald. Why are they all gone? And what about those wolf wizards? Did they go to school here during the summer vacation and leave before the new term started? Wasn't Filch's girlfriend still in there? Had she and Ron really been writing letters hard-working as both Bee and Lavender?" Luna sat quietly aside, observing the professor's every word and action at the staff table. Especially since Hermione just spoke so loudly, it was unclear whether any wizard would be able to break through Ryan's magic cover and react. Did Dumbledore and Professor Riddle, who was transformed from Voldemort's Horcrux, really know nothing about this? As for Ryan, I have faced a series of questions from Hermione. He has long been used to it. After knowing that Ryan knows almost everything, Hermione liked to ask a lot of questions in one breath. So, he raised his eyebrows and replied easily, "It's from the other 3 schools' time." So did Filch's girlfriend, Miss Campbell. She and Ron were actually corresponding. Because their personalities are so compatible. If you don't look at his appearance, he's almost a gender-reverse version of Ron. A more confident version. So isn't it normal that when you meet another self, you communicate more frequently than with Lavender? Hermione was stunned. Being the gender-reverse version of Ron is Professor McGonagall's. How could Filch fall in love with Ron? Professor Dumbledore and Professor Riddle really didn't seem to be paying attention to us. But something was very wrong with Professor Riddle. He became more upright. He's like a unicorn in human form. Professor Dumbledore seems to be very lonely. He's unabashedly lonely. Luna on the side suddenly expressed her observation. "You are worthy of it, my little Luna." Ryan pressed his lips against Luna's little face and took a sip. Hermione curled her lips at this. Although his ears were erect, his head was turned to the other side, obviously intending to turn a blind eye to what was happening. Although Luna still had that cool and ethereal look, the corners of her mouth, which were naturally smiling, were slightly raised at an angle that was almost imperceptible to the naked eye. A hint of intoxicating blush also appeared on her translucent white face. After Ryan paused for a brief time to admire it, he said, "Isn't it normal that they can't see through my magic? And this is the magic I am best at?" You know, Ryan's magic power to conceal himself is passive, combined with a natural talent that will improve as long as you work hard. Ryan was not bragging. He estimated that all the wizards in the world, past and present, would not be able to see through his trick. After a brief moment of complacency, Ryan continued, "Luna, your wizard intuition or third eye is indeed extraordinary. Because of a magical ritual this summer vacation. By stripping himself of his so-called original sin, Riddle transformed into a so-called humanoid unicorn. But because he is a wizard, he possesses omnipotent magic and will not be easily targeted by skilled wizards like the unicorn. As for Dumbledore, it was all because of Grindelwald's departure. In fact, he had long been accustomed to life without Grindelwald. But he hasn't gotten used to it yet after a brief repossession." Chapter 554, Peeves Escapes. "Own it again." Hermione couldn't help but turn her head. Forget the jealousy just now. If she heard correctly, Dumbledore possessed Grindelwald again? He is over 100 years old. Is his body still in good shape? And who is on top and who is below? Hermione's gossipy nature made her tell Ryan her curiosity with her eyes without any concealment. Even Luna couldn't help but prick up her ears. Ryan responded, "Ahem, it's not what you think. This is not on a physical level." "Is that so?" Hermione dropped her face in disappointment. In Ryan's eyes, the cute and lovely rat teeth disappeared in the pouting little mouth. On the other side, Harry and his friends were sitting in a carriage with a faint smell of mold and straw. It's not that the carriages weren't maintained. But in the UK where it rains from time to time, it is normal to have a musty smell. Even wizards have long been accustomed to it, rather than resorting to all-purpose magic to remove it. According to some very particular wizards, this is the authentic British flavor. Ron took a deep breath and said, relaxed. The air is fresher after the rain. The smell of rotting leaves and branches in the soil due to the rain did not seem to affect his evaluation of the air away. But Lavender enjoyed it very much. It was the first time she saw Ron clinging to her so much. She even had the urge to write a letter to Carm to express her gratitude. If it weren't for him, Ron would probably still be hot and cold towards her. And Ron. Perhaps it was the passage of time, and the presence of lavender, which had restored its color, couldn't help but murmur, "Wait? Victor Krum." At this time, he had already forgotten about Furin. The inferiority complex and the feeling of betrayal combined together at this moment, merging into a state that made Ron full of fighting spirit. He had already thought of it. He would incorporate all the memories of the pranks that Fred and George had played on him in the past into his magic. Stroking Ron's freckled face with his other hand. "That bastard is a student at Durmstrang, and they say they teach the dark arts. And he is also a famous international star. Go against him, his fans will. Anyway, don't bite the bullet. You think I can't beat Krum?" Mr. Ron said angrily. He looked at Harry. "Does Krum have as many fans as Harry? I'm Harry's friend. Now it's the championship again. No one would dare to offend me for someone from another school. That's enough. It's all settled. Please sit down, I can't see the rain outside," Ginny said in annoyance. She paused and looked at Ron seriously. "Don't involve Harry in this matter. Krum was just a Quidditch player after all. With your magic skills, how can Krum be your opponent? How many wizards have been to the moon and learned the magic that suits them best?" Ron. In her opinion, even Ron was not someone that could be victimized by anyone. On the magical level, Krum is just that cat and dog. As for Harry and Neville, they still didn't voice their doubts. Because even Lavender, the protagonist of the incident, thinks Krum is a bastard. They just had to shut up. Waiting to meet Krum in the auditorium. The carriage passed through a gate with winged wild boar sculptures on both sides and drove along the driveway ped at the foot of the stone steps in front of the two oak doors. "It's waterproof and moisture-proof." Ron pointed his wand at Lavender. The rain on his head condensed into balls and then evaporated into gas. "I should have used magic earlier, of running here myself." He was about to point a wand at himself when a large red balloon filled with water dropped from the ceiling and exploded instead above Ron's head. Ron was soaked all over and grumbled, but he blocked Lavender in time. Ron looked at Lavender, who was safe and sound, then raised his head. "Who is it?" 20 feet above their heads was floating the mischievous Peeves. He was short, wearing a hat with bells on it, an orange bow tie, and holding a water balloon in his hand. However, he was not prepared to take aim again. Instead, he scurried up the marble stairs and disappeared like a victim. "It gave me a fright. I almost thought Harry's anti-Peeves wards were gone." It turned out that he didn't have time to escape. Neville on the side breathed a sigh of relief. He waved his wand, and Ron, who had just been wet, became dry arms, because of Ron's behavior just now. Peeves. But there was nothing. There was not even a hint of mischief. Because of the rainy weather, she ignored the water stains on the ground. She immediately regained her understanding. Professor McGonagall breathed a sigh of relief and said to Harry, "So it's you who are here, Harry. It's a good thing you got to the hall so quickly, or the students would have been in trouble." She sternly said to the soaked crowd, "If you're fine, hurry into the auditorium." Couldn't help muttering. Obviously, he blamed Krum for everything that had just happened. Harry, Ron, and Lavender slid down the hall, with Neville following close behind them. However, after passing through the two doors on the right, Ron stood still. Chapter 555. Ron becomes famous again. Everyone's eyes were focused on the door of the auditorium. Percy, who no longer cared about his reputation due to his family's prosperity, also lowered his head in shame. The Weasley twins began to dance and heckle of one person. Someone who is very famous at Hogwarts. Ron Weasley, one of the three musketeers. He just stood at the door of the auditorium and yelled to the sky, "Krum! Where are you?" His face was grim and he looked unsatisfied. Although he was still holding Lavender with one hand newspaper, it is said that Krum sat with Ron and the others in Florin's ice cream shop for an entire afternoon. Ron has a history of this. He had been rumored to have had affairs with Harry and Neville in his first year. As for her girlfriend Lavender, pairs of bright eyes stared at Ron, who was leaning against the door powerlessly, losing his energy because he couldn't see Krum. He was still mumbling Krum's name. Lavender tried to comfort him, but it was of no use. This made the owners of those bright eyes, the witches with the souls of rotten girls, even more excited. This happened just 2 years ago. There's Draco. He and Harry are a couple. The rest is dominated by heterosexuals. The protagonists, except Neville, are single. Both Harry and Draco are engaged. Even Ron had Lavender. But today, it's back, it's back. The atmosphere of the past is back. They all looked up at Dumbledore. They were all thinking about one thing: when the people from the other three schools would arrive. Side Professor McGonagall, who had just come over to scold Ron, gave up her plan after seeing his distracted and defeated look. Returning to the first-year students in the other room, Harry wanted to stay where he was and wait for Ron to come to his senses, but Ginny forcibly pulled him away. And Neville, seeing that Harry and Ginny were gone. In addition, he saw the beautiful figure not far behind Dudley, and he took a step forward and disappeared on the spot without realizing it. Only Ron was left, still leaning against the door with a dead look on his face. All the courage he had accumulated before disappeared because of Crum's absence. As for the others who knew Ron, they couldn't bear the burning gazes of the Fujoshi. I also don't want to be included in the forced pairing with Ron. Ron saw Spot and said, "You're famous again. I'm afraid the I gain back this semester won't be as great as yours." He pretended not to notice what had just happened, with an expression of admiration on his face. Michael and Terry, who were standing beside him, couldn't help but pull at his sleeves. They thought it was unreliable. However, Ron slowly raised his head. "Am I really famous?" "Really? Now your mist bottles will probably sell like hotcakes too. Why didn't I think of that?" Ron muttered to himself in the face of Anthony's repeated encouragement. He took Lavender's hand and stood up. He looked around. The looks that ordinary people could not tolerate were pleasant to him. He even waved. He was responded by the witches booing. However, to him, these were like scattered petals and music of blessing had held high, and his chest puffed out, with great pride on his lips. In response, Michael and Terry beside Anthony looked at him with admiration. Anthony shook his head, indicating that it was not a good idea. Ryan, who was looking down to avoid Kate's playful gaze, couldn't help but sigh. Gryffindor table, Ron, look at the 6 empty seats above the staff table and the 3 long tables next to Slytherin. Harry reminded Ron as soon as he sat down he was afraid that Ron would return to his previous state. "I noticed it a long time ago." Ron said this, but turned his head to look at the Slytherin side as if he had just discovered something. "Harry, just leave him alone. What's important now is why the ghosts disappeared." Ginny pouted. No." Seamus at the Gryffindor table turned around. "They are said to be becoming more and more like living people, except that their bodies are translucent. There is no other difference. They seem to be preparing to appear with other schools to show off the great magic invented by Ravenclaw." Appearing together, Ron asked hurriedly when he heard the voices of other schools to show up after the sorting. "Same with the ghosts?" Harry asked, "But I did research. In previous competitions, other schools clearly arrived about 3 or 4 days after the start of school. Also, if the ghosts were going to come out, why wasn't there a ghostly, translucent table floating above our heads? Mr. Digg told me. Like previous competitions, the competitions were announced at the beginning of the school year. This time is different. It was mentioned at the end of year dinner last school year request of the ghosts. Dumbledore was ready to perform ghostly magic on the scene this time. Come get the big one, Dean said. You know Daedalus Diggle. He's also a hero of the Order of the Phoenix. He's Dean's uncle. As soon as Dean finished speaking, such voices came one after another around him. Now, after the report of the Daily Prophet, almost all British wizards can accurately recite the name of each original member of the Order of the Phoenix and their deeds. It is said that Toffin Clothing Store is planning to invite members of the Order of the Phoenix to be their spokespeople. In response, Harry and Ginny looked at each other and smiled with relief. However, Ron only noticed one thing. So you put it. After the sorting, that bastard, the piglet, the flobberworm, will appear after the sorting. Chapter 556, The Provocative Sorting Song. Time passed so slowly. This was the first time Ryan felt this way. Because in addition to Kate, Penelope, who had just finished her duties as Students' Union president, also joined the staring army, unabashedly watching his interactions with Luna and Hermione. I feel like I'm sitting on pins and needles. The method of listening to gossip that I used to pass the time no longer works. Everyone around seemed to be talking about only one topic, the Final Four who would compete to be the champion of Hogwarts, what events would be in the competition, and how the students of Bookspitons, Durmstrang and Castellabus were different from them. What the hell, a whole summer vacation has passed, so forget about the Muggle-borns. How come these people who grew up in the wizarding world don't know information about other schools? What is there to discuss? Besides, didn't Ron just make a fool of himself? Why don't you talk about Ron's gossip? Ryan, who was almost tired of listening to the semifinals, had no choice but to give up. He grabbed Hermione and Luna's hands and taught Vergato the gesture magic. And Harry. In the past, he would observe everything on the staff desk. Especially Dumbledore. But today he didn't, because of what Dean said. He didn't even look at the staff seats. He kept looking around, trying to find traces of other schools. However, after going around like this, the only thing I noticed was that the castle was thoroughly cleaned. Several dirty portraits were scrubbed clean, much to the displeasure of the characters who were scrubbed. They sat huddled in the picture frame, muttering unhappily, and grimacing in pain every time they touched the newly exposed pink flesh on their faces today. Harry had never seen it so stormy. Black and purple clouds rolled above, and as another round of thunder sounded outside, a forked streak of lightning streaked across the ceiling. Before we knew it, Professor McGonagall had already brought out those little first-year kids. The group of little kids were all soaked. It's not so much that they came here by ferry as that they swam across the lake. The first-year students, like in previous years, had their backs to the staff seats and were facing them. But this year, perhaps because of the rain and they were soaked, the freshmen seemed particularly nervous. However, there was a little boy with blonde hair who was different. He seemed extremely confident, almost aggressively so. Appears particularly arrogant. She looked just like Hermione in first year, but twice as annoying as she was when she wasn't in front of Ryan. Look, this made Harry feel curious and pity for the boy. He was doomed to be unlucky after being targeted by Ryan. At this time, Professor McGonagall placed a three-legged stool on the ground in front of the freshman, and placed a tattered, dirty, and patched wizard's hat on the stool. The first-year students stared at it in amazement. Others looked at it too for a moment. There was silence in the auditorium. Then a crack near the brim opened like a mouth, and the hat suddenly began to sing. That was 1,000 years ago. 4 great wizards founded Hogwarts. This attracted countless wizards to come and learn and imitate. The first was Elvis, the kindly Hufflepuff. Was his friend came the brave Vulcanova. She studied at Gryffindor House. Durmstrang was founded in Germany, where witches had a lower status than wizards. Finally, there is the proud Monty, who is from Slytherin and returns to his hometown. Inherited Durmstrang, established a tradition of dueling and war magic. After the Sorting Hat finished singing, there was warm applause in the hall. So, these 3 schools are actually related to Hogwarts. Lisa Dupin exclaimed. She looked at Harry, the authority figure of their class. He always knows best. This song is simply provoking a fight, Harry said with lingering fear. What's going on? Padma asked hurriedly. Maxime, the founder of Boxburton. She didn't return to her hometown because of any extraordinary wisdom, but being excluded. Because, as you all know, she is French. The founder of Durmstrang, Vulcanova, died mysteriously while in office. Then, Harvin Mount, who came from Slytherin, quickly took over the position of headmaster. Combined with the word inheritance in the school song, it's ironic. And it was Monty who started the first dark period in Durmstrang's history. Harry said with a complicated expression. Then they won't fight with us. Lisa Dupin swallowed. This caused Ron to sneer. Fight? That's perfect. I can deal with Krum openly. What? You don't like him? Lisa Dupin exclaimed. Lisa, you don't know. Laughed in anger. I couldn't help but patted the table and said, I just liked it before. But not now. Padma, you should know. Krum confessed to Lavender. With my girlfriend. I see. Lisa agreed. But Ron's words and behavior translated into another meaning in her ears. Ron liked Krum. But Krum doesn't like men of provocation. His attention was focused on the sorting ceremony. He only wanted to know one thing now. What was the name of the guy with yellow hair? Maybe you can see why Ryan hates him. After Ron explained the whole story, the sorting ceremony just happened to come to an end, and it was time to sort the surnames starting with S. Zacharias Smith. Hufflepuff. Finally, the sorting ceremony ended with the sound of Zacharias Smith being sorted into Hufflepuff. Professor McGonagall picked up the sorting hat and the stool and took them away. And Harry, what the hell? His last name is Smith too. And he can be in Hufflepuff too. Chapter 557 Boxbuttons. What impression do Hufflepuff students have on students from the other 3 houses? Selflessness, fairness, and loyalty are the labels they give to Hufflepuff students. Even those nasty little bastards among Hufflepuffs. They are not hated because of character issues. It's just because they tend to follow the crowd and believe in rumors. Just when Harry was wondering if he was judging people by their appearance, The blonde Hufflepuff freshman named Zacharias rudely snatched the seat of another freshman. This also brought Dudley's lesson to him. "What's wrong, Harry?" Ginny asked worriedly, squeezing Harry's hand. She didn't hear Harry's words of doubting life just now. "Let me ask you a question. Have you ever seen a Hufflepuff student actively bully others?" "Want to admit it, Dudley was admitted to Hufflepuff because he became a better person." Harry shook his head. "Is that the blonde guy?" Ginny pointed to the Hufflepuff table next to them. She followed Harry's gaze and saw Dudley reading him. And as Harry said, Dudley himself was not a bully at this point. "That's him. How could someone like him be admitted to Hufflepuff?" "Hufflepuff, I thought I had mistaken him." Harry turned his head away, determined not to look at him for the time being. "Why would you care about a freshman?" Ginny couldn't help but be curious. "His last name is Smith. I finally understand why our Ryan hates him." "What?" "He and Ryan should not be the same Smith. With blonde hair and Smith, there is only one possibility." "Oops, why didn't I think of that just now?" "I understand. I can see why he was in Hufflepuff. Why, the descendants of Hufflepuff are named Smith. They are indeed not likable. It is said that after Hufflepuff died, their ancestors stole the golden cup that Hufflepuff himself kept in the kitchen. They are nothing like Hufflepuff herself, with her high and mighty manners. More like a Slytherin than a Hufflepuff," Ginny finally explained. Harry suddenly realized Sorting had finished. However, this time he did not reach for the knife and fork. Nor did he stare at the empty golden plate in front of him. Instead, his attention was focused on Professor Dumbledore, who suddenly stood up. Professor Dumbledore waved his wand, and a dark sky appeared in the air. The sound of rain and wind came from inside. You can even smell a hint of water vapor. "Where is that?" a Gryffindor first year asked loudly. "Forbidden Forest. Something is flying." "It's a house." "Which school?" The students around screamed in surprise at the scene in the air pulled into the air by 12 winged horses, all of which had silver hands and were each as big as an elephant. Then a loud bang was heard from the screen and outside the door. The scene on the screen also shifted to outside the hallway. The golden horses shook their huge heads and their big fiery red eyes turned. "It's Boxbuttons." Ron sighed. But the corners of his mouth unconsciously turned up. Obviously, he was thinking of Furin, who he met at Flourish and Blotts. "You figured it out from the coat of arms. The emblem of Boxbuttons is composed of 2 golden crossed wands, with 3 stars emerging from each wand." Harry laughed dryly. He also thought of the unknown French witch inexplicably humble in front of Ginny. However, it seemed that because of the rain, the door was not opened until now after the carriage stopped steadily. A boy in a light blue robe jumped out of the carriage. It seemed as if some magic was cast on him, and the cold rain automatically avoided his body when it fell on him. He bent down and groped for something on the floor of the carriage. Ladders, handrails, then came a shiny black high-heeled shoe the size of a child's sled. It stuck out from the carriage. "Then there's the owner of this high-heel shoe." There were bursts of gasps in the auditorium. Harry and the others were well prepared. This must be the witch Hagrid liked, a half-giant with the same surname as the founder of Boxbuttons, the current headmaster of Boxbuttons Academy of Magic. But even so, Harry and the others couldn't help but gasp when the woman walked into the hall. Because the face illuminated by the light in the hallway was not the fleshy face they had imagined. On the contrary, the face was very handsome and olive-colored. With her pair of big, black, watery eyes and pointed nose, anyone who sees her would have to praise her as an exquisite French girl. Coupled with the shiny bun, the black satin clothes wrapped from head to toe, and the luxurious opals shining on the neck and thick fingers, the image of a traditional lady appeared in Harry's mind. She? A hybrid giant. Harry and the others couldn't help but feel shaken. Ron's attention was all behind Ms. Maxime because of her tall stature. Ron couldn't see the figure behind her until now. There were about 12 or 13 male and female students. Their robes were made of silk, and they wore no cloaks. Everyone was shivering slightly because of the cold weather. Harry couldn't help but follow Ron's gaze and look at those students, but he didn't seem to see a figure that fits the image of the French witch. Harry guessed that she was one of several students who had wrapped their heads with scarves or turbans. While Harry was thinking, the students had already filed in following Madame Maxime. They were divided into 2 columns. The students went to the long table next to Slytherin, the one closest to the wall among the 3 long tables. The principal went to the staff table on the stage. Chapter 558 Durmstrang. Why is there no introduction? Lisa Dupin was puzzled. She was curious about the tall witch. Professors from the other 2 schools came to Hogwarts this summer. Only Boxbuttons had their headmaster, Ms. Maxime, come. And there are 2 other schools that haven't arrived yet. Look, the people around looked at the picture in the air again. The scene now comes to Black Lake. That calm, dark surface of the water, but suddenly the water was no longer calm. There was a commotion under the water in the middle of the lake, huge splashes on the surface, breaking waves against the wet shore. Then, right in the middle of the lake, a huge whirlpool appeared, as if a huge plug had been pulled suddenly out of the bottom of the lake. A long black pole-like object slowly rose from the whirlpool. Then the sail rigging. This must be Durmstrang. Ron sneered, pulled out his wand, and began to wipe it slowly with a corner of his robe. How do you know? Simo asked curiously. Need I say more? Castelbrosa is in the rainforest. How can they sail a boat? Crumb. Crumb. Ron acted almost crazy, licking the corner of his mouth from time to time. People around me felt uncomfortable. I could only look up into the air again. At this time, the ghost ship, which was flickering a dim and misty light, had completely emerged with a loud splashing sound. In the cold rain and choppy waves, we headed towards the lake shore. Then there was another splash, and an anchor was thrown into the shallow water, and then there was another snap, and a plank of wood was placed on the shore. Finally, the picture suddenly focused on a man who walked to the deck first. This was the second man whom Harry felt looked very wizardly. He has flowing golden hair, and his luxurious black leather coat is inlaid with many decorations made of unknown metals. The tips of his long fingers rested on a dark and shadowy cane. Face the coming cold rain calmly. This is undoubtedly Getter Grindelwald. Harry subconsciously looked at Dumbledore. He has noticed that the professors around him were looking at Dumbledore with mischievous eyes. And Dumbledore seemed to have noticed the gazes around him. The screen in mid-air suddenly went black. When it reappeared, the perspective was focused on the back of the old man. The people behind him were now wearing thick black fur cloaks. This made them look very large, about the same size as Crabbe and Goyle. However, the fur of the wizard leading the group was the same color, silver white, and texture as his hair body. Moreover, though the texture of the fur was very good, even in the cold rain, it didn't get tangled like those of the students behind it. But it is soft and smooth. But his expression was not as high profile as his appearance. On the contrary, he was humble. He almost bent over and walked towards the castle. Just as Harry was concentrating on the picture, a burst of heat suddenly came from his ears. Careful of. He is still the main one. But I feel he is more like a servant. Ginny was confused by this. She and Harry had both been shown a photograph of Karkaroff by a worried Mrs. Weasley, taken some years earlier when he had been on a business trip to the Italian Ministry of Magic as headmaster of Durmstrang. In the photo, Karkaroff looked very slick and arrogant, giving people a feeling of being pampered. It's completely different from now. Grindelwald, his new master, around. How can Karkaroff put on airs? Harry also whispered in Ginny's ear. However, this made Ron thought they were making out. He grew led into satisfaction. I'm still in a bad mood. Can you wait until I teach Krum a lesson before you do this? After saying this, he turned and looked towards the door of the auditorium. By this time Grindelwald and Karkaroff had reached the center of the hall. And the students just stepped through the gate. One of them was Krum. But Krum was not as difficult to distinguish from the crowd as the French witch. He walked at the end of the crowd. Despite being an international star, he didn't seem to be popular at all in school. The classmates around him regarded him as a plague and stayed away from him, waved to him. Ron and the others cordially turned even worse. Karkaroff. At Grindelwald's signal, Karkaroff did not go to the staff table. Instead, he went to the table belonging to Durmstrang in dejection. Grindelwald sat directly next to Dumbledore. He leaned on the table as if no one was around, and looked straight at Dumbledore's unconsciously stiff face. Blow a kiss to your girlfriend. Know that we includes you. Maybe Krum doesn't know about your relationship with Lavender. Harry said to Ron after thinking for a moment. Impossible, absolutely impossible. Although I didn't tell him who my girlfriend is. But he and Lavender had been pen pals for such a long time. He even mentioned knowing us. How is it possible that the letter didn't mention anything about Lavender and my relationship? Ron replied angrily. Padma on the side seemed a little embarrassed, but, my sister told me. It was she who introduced Krum and Lavender. She said Lavender was single. Lavender said that. Parvati told her. But she still called Krum a bastard. Ron waved his hand to show that he didn't want to hear it clearly with Lavender. Chapter 559 Castrobus. Krum thought he had gotten used to everything, even to the point of not caring about life and death. Before Grindelwald came, He was a well-known figure in the school and the favorite student of the annoying Karkaroff. Everything changed after that demon came. Because of a Krum's clear opposition to Grindelwald's attitude. He was rejected by those around him and by Karkaroff turned into ignoring. Therefore, Krum felt that he had already remained calm even when the world was about to collapse. But, danger! 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 Krum's heart suddenly skipped a beat. I have turned to look at the source of the danger. That's Ron. She was looking at him with an almost fanatical look. Him. Finished. Barbie is cute. Ron really fell in love with him. For the first time, Krum felt despair. But fortunately, with the exclamations of people around, he noticed Ron had averted his eyes. He and the people around him looked up into the air. The scene in mid-air changed again. Now we have arrived at the grasslands beside the Black Lake slope down to the ground. A giant redwood emerges from the rise. A moment later, a bang was heard. A wooden spiral staircase grows slowly from the center of the tree until it touches the ground. A slender, wheat-colored hand appeared immediately behind. The owner of the hand was dressed in a bright green robe, long brown hair, oval face, and a pair of narrow and long phoenix eyes. Is it true that he and Dumbledore have no blood relationship? Hermione couldn't help asking. Ryan shook his head. No, there are so many people in this world who look alike without any blood relationship. I think I should have introduced him. Castor Pollach, grandfather of the famous pharmacist Lobasho Pollach. After Castorbuse's people entered the auditorium, they also divided into two columns. The student went to the second long table next to Slytherin. That is, between Boxburtons and Durmstrang. The old man and the witch both went to the staff table. Flitwick, a short man, almost slipped off a pile of cushions he was sitting on out of surprise. Dumbledore waved his wand, and the image in the air suddenly disappeared. He cleared his throat. I think all of you can't wait. There are many questions to ask. Everyone knows that this competition is different from previous ones. It is no longer a few selected warriors representing the school competition. The group competition is for all teachers and students to participate together. It involves 3 areas: group potions, war magic, and alchemy. The principals of the other 3 schools will present their views later. And the individual competition is the indispensable warrior in the championship. The selection will be made by impartial judges recognized by all 4 art colleges. First taped lightly, and a long table full of food floated in the air, the place where the picture just played. The students around him all widened their eyes. They all knew that Dumbledore was about to perform Ravenclaw's secret magic, Gustification, for the first time in front of everyone. The students from other schools next to Slytherin also held their breath daring to speak. Dumbledore seemed about to be under a petrification spell after he created everything in midair, and was almost motionless. But if you look closely, you can see that the wand in his hand is shaking slightly. After a moment, it began to swing. But it was as if the entire wand was filled with lead, and Harry could see that veins even appeared on Dumbledore's right hand. A milky white beam of magic light was emitted from the tip of the wand into the air. After an unknown amount of time, Dumbledore made the final heavy stroke. Then, the milky white magic runes floating in the air flew towards the long table in midair. A blinding white light flashed, and a long transparent table with transparent dishes on it appeared in its place. Ghosts flew out from the surrounding walls. They no longer have the milky glow they once had. If you don't look at their translucent bodies, you might even think they are living people. In an instant, large silk banners appeared on the walls, one for each of the Hogwarts houses. The red background with a golden lion is Gryffindor, the blue background with a bronze eagle is Ravenclaw, the yellow background with a black badger is Hufflepuff, and the green background with a silver python is Slytherin. Behind the staff desk, the largest banner appeared, with a Hogwarts coat of arms. A lion, an eagle, a badger and a snake are connected together to surround a big letter H. I really want to say sorry for the long wait and just tell you directly, eat. But obviously, we need to introduce the other 3 headmasters next, said Dumbledore. Then, the cool-looking old man next to Dumbledore also stood up. The sharp-eyed Harry also noticed that he touched Dumbledore directly. Hello. I will be speaking for Headmaster Karkaroff at Durmstrang. Misunderstanding compared to the dark arts. We are better at dueling and war magic, I think. Those of you who have listened carefully to the school song should be very clear about it, and war magic is the content of the first group match. It will start in October every Saturday at 3 p.m. from now on. I will explain war magic to everyone in the auditorium. Or rather openly. Dumbledore, however, remained calm, and showed no reaction at all. It was as if it wasn't him who was being touched. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 560, The Relationship Between Group Competition and Individual Competition. Who is he? Why don't you introduce yourself? He's really cool though. That Karkaroff looks scared of him. And, what is war magic? Are the individual and group competitions related? Who is the referee? I bet it must be Dumbledore himself. After the cool old guy sat down, the students below started discussing. As soon as she stood up, people gasped. Even though everyone already knew that her body shape was similar to Hagrid's. But this kind of figure combined with this kind of face still gives people a strong sense of difference. Hello. I am Olivia Maxime. Madame Maxime paused. Here the buzzing sound like a mosquito was heard again in the auditorium. It was the students below who started the discussion again. Is that Maxim? From the school song? Why are there no descendants of our school's founders? Amidst these discussions, one sentence made Ryan raise his eyebrows. His left hand under the table briefly moved away from Luna's thigh and snapped his fingers. And then, bang! Zacharias Smith, who had been trained like a dog by Dudley for bullying his classmates, slammed the table and stood up. Just you wait. Zacharias Smith, a descendant of the great Hufflepuff, will definitely replace that old wily Dumbledore and become the greatest headmaster of Hogwarts when I graduate. Wait, what are you doing? As Zacharias was talking about the headmaster, Dudley elbowed him off the table. I can't breathe. Let me go, you ridiculous mudblood. Sizzle. The students around him started to do their homework again with a gasp. At the staff table, Professor McGonagall's face was livid with anger. This time Professor Flitwick actually slid off the cushions and onto the ground. Even Professor Sprout, who was always friendly, couldn't help blushing. Professor Snape has the strongest action. After hearing the target was a mudblood and that the target was Sister Lily's son, he perked up from his gloomy state. Before the other professors could react, Professor Snape had already arrived in front of Zacharias and picked him up. Realizing what was happening, Zacharias changed his aggressive attitude. It's like the whole body has been pulled out of the bones. Very good, I think my basement will welcome a descendant of a great founder. Snape said with a low laugh. No points will be deducted. I mean, school hasn't officially started yet. Snape was about to get angry when he heard that, but he saw it was Dudley. He forced a smile and said, no. But he wants confinement. Starting today, until Professor Sprout says to stop. Then he practically dragged Zacharias into the auditorium. Subconsciously. But Ryan didn't even smile. While talking to Luna, Hermione was sulking beside her. Ryan obviously hates Zacharias, but he didn't react to this. It's Ryan. I wonder how that Zacharias could be so stupid. Harry thought. He quickly withdrew his gaze and turned towards Hufflepuff. Pretend you were just like everyone else. He doesn't want to be the next Zacharias. And Madame Maxime in the staff seat. His expression is extremely wonderful. She had no intention of causing trouble. She just knew that the students of Hogwarts had just listened to the school song. Knowing the origin of her last name, she wanted to give these students some time to make a scene. But what was unexpected was that things would turn out this way. If Hagrid beside her hadn't coughed, she would not have come to her senses. Haha, you guessed it right. Returned to France because of homesickness or any other reason. Ravenclaw is not disgusted by different people as described. She was an outcast, staying in England. Hagrid coughed again. Maxim stopped immediately. She was so nervous just now that she actually spoke out her true feelings. The students at the Booksbritons table wanted to applaud. However, because of the look on their principal's face and the eye contact of a girl with a scarf wrapped around her head, they gave up. Maxim cleared his throat, smiled and waved his hand. By the way, you are all curious about why alchemy, war magic, and group potions are used in group competitions, right? How does this relate to individual competitions? The answer is simple as the second event, the content of the group competition. It will officially start in January next year. However, the course does not have to be postponed to January. The time is also every Saturday. I will be teaching in the auditorium from 10 to 11 a.m. After saying this, Madame Maxime sat down quickly. She seemed afraid that she might accidentally say more things that she shouldn't say this time, looking very happy, as if he had released the illness that had been suppressing him for a long time. The students below also started a heated discussion again. He didn't seem to be too at all because of the delay in mealtime, so he didn't have the energy to speak. Alchemy. There's no such course in Hogwarts. Props can we make? Shoes that can fly. Haha. I've watched a Riemann hundreds of times and it's finally useful. Is it possible that the items you are looking at are already finished in the Skywalker Alchemy Workshop? Didn't you notice? She slandered us Ravenclaws. Isn't that what Ravenclaw does? Ravenclaw has another cool element. Our people are fiercely independent. Some would even call them eccentric, but geniuses are usually out of step with ordinary people. Unlike some colleges, we think you can wear whatever you like, believe whatever you want, and say whatever you like. We don't dislike people who are different. On the contrary, we admire them. I bother. When my grandmother was in school, she was excluded from Ravenclaw because she dressed a little strangely. Okay, next one. Yet. He and Dumbledore look like a couple. Did you notice? Professor Riddle has a bad face, because of that cool old man. Professor Riddle, my Professor Riddle. He's even more handsome now, and makes me feel so safe. He. Chapter 561 Heartbroken Harry. Just as the students' discussion was getting more and more off-topic when it was first occupied by Professor Riddle's flesh fans, Dumbledore stood up and said quiet then. The headmaster of Casterbuse, with his almond-eyed eyes, stood up. Hello, my name is Nifinch Vukanova, the principal of Casterbuse. I think you all have guessed what our school is responsible for, group potions, but I'm not a professor of group potions. Before I ask Professor Apology to speak, I would like to mention that the magic of concealing the school's address was first invented by our school. There was applause of support from Casterbuse's table. At the Gryffindor table, the Weasley twins led the booing. The old man who looked like Dumbledore stood up. Water, Fred. George. Professor McGonagall upstairs couldn't sit still anymore. Then, silence returned to the auditorium. After a moment, the black version of Dumbledore said, "Our headmaster just made an obvious mistake. There is no consensus on who first invented the magic of concealing the school's address. All I can say is that both are possible. My name is Custer Palach. I think you might be familiar with another Palachi. He is my grandson. He is also the author of Advanced Potion Making, an Asian Anti-Poison Encyclopedia, which you will use in 5th grade. I think you have guessed it. Group Potion is the third event, the examination content of the group competition. It will start in April next year. The content is the same as the previous 2 exams." Then, the black version of Dumbledore sat down. Real Dumbledore stood up again. He opened his hands and smiled. "Now I can finally say, eat. Everyone eat and drink as much as they can, just like at home." He sat down, and Harry noticed that Grindelwald immediately leaned over to engage him in conversation. The plates in front of them were piled high with food as usual, upright in the air, and had not spoken a word just now quickly raised their knives and forks and ran towards the food. "What's that?" Ron asked quickly, pointing to a large plate of something next to a large steak and kidney pudding. It looked like a seafood chowder. He seemed ready to vent his grief and indignation on his appetite. "Brittleux," said Harry. "What a mess," said Ron. "Ruined by bad food, so you have to ask clearly." "It's French food," said Harry. "Creature made it for me when I was at Sirius's. It tastes delicious." "I'll believe you. But why haven't I seen it at Sirius's house?" Ron said, serving himself some black pudding grass. "I was wondering why everything I ate at Sirius's was what I liked." "Well, that's not bad." Ron took a sip of his soup. Somehow, the auditorium seemed more crowded than usual, even though there were only less than 20 more students and 3 long tables. Perhaps it was because their different colored uniforms stood out against the black robes of Hogwarts. The Durmstrang students took off their fur cloaks, revealing the blood-red robes underneath. It is particularly obvious when combined with the blue of Boxburton's and the bright green of Castellabush. "It's her." Ron suddenly put down his knife and fork, as if he was about to faint. Harry looked in the direction Ron pointed. That was the Boxburton's girl who used her eyes to stop other students from clapping when Maxime said something wrong. She turned out to be the French girl from Flourish and Blots. She finally took off her scarf. A long waterfall of silver hair fell to her waist. She has a pair of big blue eyes and a set of neat white teeth. She was tall and slender, and the light from the candle seemed to shine on her body. Ouch! A pain came from the waist. Harry finally came to his senses. He looked down and saw it was Ginny. He quickly hugged Ginny and said, "It was all Ron, he just showed it to me." Forced these words out of his throat. Harry quickly turned his head and put Ginny out of his mind again. It was strange, considering Ginny was in his arms right then. But Harry felt empty. Because that Boxburton's girl is coming over. As the girl walked through the hall, many of the boys turned their heads to look at her, and several of them seemed to become speechless for a moment, just like Ron. But to Harry's greatest surprise was walking towards them. Could it be that as a student of Boxburton's, he wanted to get back to Ravenclaw? Just as Harry was thinking of 100 ways for him to stand up for Ravenclaw and pretend to be defeated and have physical contact with a girl. Only then did I discover something left. Ryan had been sitting there, looking him up and down in embarrassment. And this Boxburton's girl was talking to Ron just to sit with him? Harry's heart was broken. He subconsciously looked between Luna and Hermione again. There was another Ryan there. When Ryan noticed his gaze, he actually toasted him with a glass of pumpkin juice. It's heartbreaking to kill someone knife and fork to the empty seat next to Ginny. Then everything around me changed. The eyes of those boys who had been staring at the girl changed from obsession to clarity. Ron also acted as if he had been sitting next to Ginny. Only he could see everything on his left. Ryan and the girl were talking happily, whispering intimately from time to time. But Harry couldn't hear anything at all, he could only see. Chapter 562, Changes of Ghosts. What are you doing? Just as Harry was thinking bitterly about what had just happened, Ginny in his arms blushed and made a sound as small as a mosquito as she broke free from his arms and returned to her seat. Ginny's perspective just now, Harry suddenly hugged her in his arms. Meanwhile, a huge wave of emotion was rising in Harry's heart. Ginny, he had actually just forgotten about Ginny. He subconsciously felt relieved. If it weren't for Ryan's magic, people around him would have ignored him and the Boxburton's girl. So, Harry couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. You know, when he was acting like a pig just now, Nicole was in his arms. Here. Harry quickly served Ginny another serving of fish soup de Provence. How? What about Gabrielle? Isn't she coming? Ryan smiled and served Fleur some authentic British fish and chips. Fiorin took the food from Ryan and rolled her eyes at him. She's so excited to meet you. So much so that I didn't sleep all night. Mom and Dad were furious because Gabrielle had never behaved like this in front of them. As a result, she won't be able to go to Hogwarts until next month. It's just staying up late, it's not against the rules. You and I. Ryan clapped his hands twice. In response, Fiorin pretended to be angry and said, "You are so bad." Then again, I like it so much. After playing around for a while, Fiorin started to act out for no reason. Why don't you praise me? I've been waiting for a long time. Ryan shrugged. Ravenclaw is not as good as it is introduced to be. If it weren't for my intervention, little Luna would be ostracized in Ravenclaw, just like Maxim, the founder of Boxburton's. Seeing Fiorin pouting in dissatisfaction, Ryan leaned his head on her shoulder and whispered in her ear, "But there's still a reward. I am yours tonight." Ryan touched the back of Fiorin's head with his left hand, and the method of entering the room of requirement, the time of the appointment, and the slogan for entering all came to Fiorin's mind. Harry felt terribly guilty. He wondered if Ryan had expected this. Faced with Ginny, who knew nothing and fed him from time to time, Harry finally broke free from the spider web woven by the charm of the Boxburton's girl. However, this made it almost impossible for him to raise his head. Even the dessert after the meal couldn't pull him out of this mood. Here, Harry, try this. I just tasted it and it's delicious. Ginny handed over a strange, white blancmange. Here, your favorite. Ginny brought another large plate full syrupy fruit pies. The students were all full and the noise in the auditorium gradually became noisy. Everyone started discussing what had just happened. However, Harry and the others were very quiet. Harry remained silent because he felt guilty. Ginny looked at him lovingly. After eating and drinking, Ron began to look at Krum at the Durmstrang table. Lisa, Durpan and Padma on the opposite side also quiet down in this strange atmosphere, tasting the novel desserts at a much slower speed than the people around them. By the way, why don't I see Ms. Grey? Michael, who was opposite to Harry's left, that is, opposite the Boxburton's girl, looked up into the air. It would be nice if Ms. Grey were here. I would like to talk about poetry with her and look at the stars and the moon. Terry, who was good at astronomy, also said obviously, the ghosts now look almost the same as living people, which makes them have different ideas. They all want to become friends of life and death with the most beautiful lady in the ghost world, Mrs. Gray. Good evening, I heard you talking about Ms. Gray. Almost headless Nick floated down from the air holding a glass of translucent Nick unknown liquor. Michael and Terry agreed repeatedly. Wait, clean it up. Nick closed his eyes and concentrated. Then, with a flash of white light, the red sauce around Terry's mouth disappeared. You can perform magic? Without a wand? Michael exclaimed. Now we can all work magic. Almost the same as when alive. But our magic is very strange. It requires an extra step before casting, creation. When we don't create magic, it's as if it doesn't exist. Nick sighed and he pulled his neck, which was still half broken. Ms. Gray has been working on this project recently. Out a translucent finger and pierced through Terry's cheek. It feels different, Terry said suddenly. He quickly took out a translucent notebook and said, I need to write this down. This is a major discovery, child. What is your name? If it is really useful, maybe your name will be added to Ghost Weekly. Terry blushed, and after hesitating for a moment, he said, Terry Butter? Is Weber but your ancestor? Seeing Terry nod, Nick continued, why aren't you in the United States? Although Ilvermorny School of Witchcraft and Wizardry is not as good as Hogwarts, it is still a good choice considering the distance. It's not bad. After all, it was founded by the direct descendants of the Big Four. But compared to these, Nick glanced cautiously at the long table of 3 schools next to Slytherin. Our ancestors were Irish of Slytherin. Nick, the Butte you mentioned should be the descendants of Chadwick Butte. They stayed in the United States. Unlike us, he chose to return to the UK. Terry was very excited about this. He seemed very proud that his ancestors chose to return to their hometown. Weekly. Harry couldn't help asking. He had just been distracting himself by listening to the conversation between Nick, Terry and Michael. Chapter 563 Weird Ghost Weekly. Ghost, so weird it was a milky white, translucent newspaper. The cover is a bear skeleton. It said that the most beautiful ghost girl in Yorkshire showed her moving skeleton when she was alive, which caused the Headless Hunter team to fight. Bold, sexy, she really deserves to be the #1 beautiful ghost. My brother who hasn't been hard for thousands of years seems to be alive again. Her joy is so round. Our moral, below. The photos and captions are all comments. Harry took a quick look and found the comments from these ghosts from all over the world to be very strange. Harry had no idea how this bear skeleton could see things that no normal person could imagine. And just looking at the reviews, there is actually a whole page of them. Have you finished reading? I'm turning the page. Nick, who is almost headless, turned to the next page. At Nick's death anniversary dinner. This is the knight with an arrow in his forehead. In the moving photo, he is dueling with a knight with a sword in his chest. However, this dueling weapon really opened Harry's eyes. In the photo, the knight with an arrow stuck in his forehead is using a translucent elm straight pull bow as his weapon. He pulls the arrow directly out of his forehead and shoots it. Mention of the martial prowess they display in the duel. Why are there only reviews? Asked Terry, who had also finished reading the newspaper. If a newspaper's editor and audience remain unchanged for thousands of years, it will eventually come to this. Nick put away the newspaper, his voice a little low. At this moment, Harry felt a little relieved. Fortunately, Ron still clings to Krum. Otherwise, he would probably ask directly why. After an unknown amount of time, the violent storm and rainstorm disappeared from the enchanted ceiling. A quiet night sky hangs in the sky. On the dining table, the golden plates were cleaned again. And Dumbledore stood up again. Everyone turned to the headmaster. Harry was feeling a little drowsy by now. 4-poster bed he had imagined. But Ginny's face was now flushed red, and it seemed that steam was about to come out of it. Behind him, Ron was looking at him with dissatisfaction. It seemed that it was Ron who pushed him just now. Harry coughed quickly and straightened his back. Above, Dumbledore officially began his speech. Well, now that we are all digesting another extremely rich meal, I ask everyone to be quiet for a while and listen to me talk about the precautions for the new semester as usual. Dumbledore said, first-year students should know that students are not allowed to enter the Forbidden Forest and the hunting grounds. This point should now be known by several of our senior students. Is the 426th time to remind you all that dueling in the corridors between classes is not allowed. Harry, what? Dueling, not magic. Ron, now that Filch is a wizard himself, He's no longer jealous of his students performing magic. The definition of duels, along with many other rules, are listed on a long list posted on Mr. Filch's office door. Dumbledore paused. This year, there is a change in our teaching staff. Well, I regret to inform you that our Care of Magical Creatures teacher, Professor Kettleburn, retired at the end of last school year so that he could spend more time with his remaining limbs. However, I am pleased to say that his place has been filled by none other than Rubeus Hagrid, who has agreed to take on the duties of teacher in addition to his duties as gamekeeper. Warm applause began to break out continuously. Harry and the others had known the news for a long time. But he still joined in the applause, his face full of joy. Even Ron temporarily turned his eyes away from Krum. Krum was very grateful for this. Then, sparse applause broke out at Durmstrang's table. As for the Booksbritton's table, seeing that their headmaster was also very excited, as if he were a professor himself, they also joined in the applause. In addition, there was also Castribution's table. Castor Pollach, who had known Hagrid for a long time, also led the students in applauding. In short, unprecedented thunderous applause swept the entire auditorium. Harry leaned forward to look at Hagrid. He was red-faced and staring at his huge hands, with a smile hidden in his scraggly black beard. Madame Maxime, who was beside him, looked at Hagrid with her face sideways in the same posture as Grindel had just done. There was countless joy in those big eyes. Hagrid seemed to be aware of the gazes from the side and almost fainted. But there is an advantage to this. After the applause died down, he didn't burst into tears again. This is a big loss of points in front of girls. Then Dumbledore began to speak again. Well, it's getting late now, and it took us quite a while to welcome our distinguished guests today. Keeping a clear mind is important for tomorrow's class. Go to bed. Quick. Then, there was a sound of tables, chairs and benches colliding around. People from the other 3 academies began to walk out of the castle. Harry hurriedly stopped Ron. There's still a whole year left, Ron. You've got plenty of time. Ron regained his composure. Then he followed the crowd out of the auditorium. Follow the Ravenclaw team up the marble stairs to the 6th floor. After reaching the 6th floor and passing through a row of brand new armor, there is another spiral staircase that seems to have no end. Maybe it was too late. After the students at the front finished answering the questions, the students behind did not insist on answering the questions themselves as usual, but followed the crowd into the room. Chapter 564 Animagus. It was like experiencing a dream. When Harry came to his senses, he was back in the familiar bedroom. In front of their old bedroom, there is now a sign on the door that says 3rd grade. However, after opening the door, nothing seemed to have changed. The dark blue carpet embroidered with stars and moons, the narrow tall windows with blue and bronze silk hangings above them, the familiar gold embossed letters, the dark blue flannel curtains hanging over the 4-poster bed, and Hedwig, cooing and greeting him in the cage with the door half open. Harry buried himself in the soft bed. After a short rest, he looked at Ryan's bed in the corner to his left. There was no one up there. To his right, Ron had fallen asleep, and Neville also curled up in bed. Anthony, Michael and Terry also fell asleep as soon as they hit the bed. Booksbritton's girl walked upstairs. He understood that Ryan would probably not come back to sleep tonight. Harry was a little disappointed about this. He was just about to ask about the resurrection ceremony. He hadn't seen Ryan for several months. The next morning, the storm stopped, but the ceiling of the auditorium was still covered with gloomy clouds. Was having breakfast at the Slytherin table with Pansy, Crabbe and Goyle, talking about something. As for Ron, he got some food and went to the Black Lake. For the great ship of Durmstrang lying at anchor on the Black Lake class. Ron will be disappointed, as like Transfiguration, Charms and other courses, our college has separate classes. He won't be with other houses, and he won't be able to see Lavender. Neville's finger slid across the Monday column on the timetable and said, "There's Charms in the afternoon. I wonder what spells I'll learn. Care of Magical Creatures, Hagrid's class, good. It's outdoors, with Hufflepuff and the others, so Cryfinder is much better. I just looked at Seamus's schedule and their first class is Divination." Harry lowered his head and sighed. Divination class is the course that interests him most right now. However, before he had time to feel sad about the passing of time, a strange feeling of palpitations suddenly appeared. He turned his head subconsciously. It was Ryan. The Booksbritton's girl was walking towards the dining table holding Ryan's left arm. On the other side, just in front of the dining table, Another Ryan was looking at the schedule with Hermione. However, the two Ryans and their female companions seemed like air and were not noticed by anyone except him, and from what he observed, the two female companions of Ryan could not see each other or the other Ryan. If I could do that, just what? Harry. Just when he couldn't help but sigh, Ginny popped up more books. He could say the same for Ginny and Neville, who knew of Ryan's existence. In response, Ginny looked at him lovingly. If it were me, I would like to have one of them always be with Harry. After all, I'm only a sophomore and my class schedule is different. Single Neville was very depressed about this. When he thought about the Care of Magical Creatures class in the afternoon, he was full of motivation again. A familiar voice came from their ears. If it were me, I would put one by the Black Lake. Ron, didn't you find Krum to clear up the misunderstanding with him? Harry asked curiously at Ron, who looked very frustrated. At the same time, he was also glad that he thought his reasons just now couldn't convince Ginny. No. He's a coward. I never saw him leave the ship. Ron frowned. Next, Ron complained about the efforts he had made to keep an eye on Krum. Constantly complaining. This added a hint of melancholy to Harry and the others' faces. Back only then did he realize that he did not come to the classroom with other students as per the practice in previous years. In order to prevent Peeves' sudden attacks, he, as a Peeves jammer, went to and from get out of class with other students, but today, there were only Ron and Neville. Please turn to page 3 of Intermediate Transfiguration. Today we are going to learn about animagus into elephants and cheetahs at will. But even they could not break through the important limitation of this magic. Its transformation was usually limited to non-magical creatures. Transfiguration of magical creatures, such as phoenixes, dragons, hippogriffs, etc., will bring unpredictable consequences. Currently, the mainstream view in reputable magazines such as Transfiguration Today and the International Animagus Conference is that this is because there is a fundamental difference in the operation of wizard magic and the magic of magical creatures. You may have noticed. The book does not provide detailed steps for practicing animagus. Just a rough introduction. To be precise, it is a magical ritual. It is extremely dangerous. When it is performed for the first time, one will often get caught up in the tangle of animality and humanity. Another heartbeat will be heard. Once you lose control, you are likely to sink to the level of animals back. The animal's habits and even some organs will be retained. You can turn to page 5. The most famous example of a wizard who failed as an animagus was the Welsh goatman Willy. He is almost a sheep, except that he can walk upright and talk. To make matters worse, one time he was eating grass in the meadow and accidentally fell asleep to go astray and have serious consequences. Therefore, the Ministry of Magic strictly controls it and requires all animagus transformed animals and characteristics to be registered with the Ministry of Magic's Misuse of Magic Office. Quotation mark. Chapter 565, The Magic World's birth rate is declining, and I will stop it. The students in the audience couldn't help but start whispering. Professor McGonagall, who had turned into a tabby cat on the stage, was still immersed in Macy thoughts. In fact, when McGonagall talked about the story of Willy, the Welsh sheepman, in front of every third-year student, she never went further to talk about Willy being insulted by muggles. But it's different now. She feels that today's students can already receive this information. She used to be too old-fashioned. Her student Ron was rumored to have an affair with his roommates Harry and Neville in his first year. Then Harry was eager to find a girlfriend and even got engaged. As for Ron and her girlfriend Lavender, McGonagall always thought that Ron didn't behave like a boyfriend should. Lavender was more like a shield to him. On the contrary, his attitude towards Harry was more like a romantic relationship. McGonagall thought it was all Dumbledore's fault. He failed to set a good example as a man of influence. This year he even brought his lover who was hiding in prison to Hogwarts. Even at the dinner party, they exchanged glances and kissed each other without any concealment. This made Mag believe the rumors even more. The reason why Newt was expelled and later ran to the United States was to escape Dumbledore's pursuit. The then principal, Armando, also contributed to this. He saw through Dumbledore's ulterior motives as he was in a period of emptiness due to his separation from Grindelwald, and resolutely fired Newt. As for Newt, perhaps he thought that Dumbledore would stop bothering him after he subdued Grindelwald. On the one hand, he found a girl and started a relationship, and on the other hand, he took the risk to meet Dumbledore again and participated in the battle against Grindelwald. It was not until 1945 that Grindelwald was officially defeated and imprisoned in Nuremberg by Dumbledore. Newt then stopped avoiding the meeting with Dumbledore. Then came Voldemort. It is said that Tom Riddle turned into Voldemort because Dumbledore had his eyes on him. At that time, Dumbledore was in urgent need of a strong wizard who suited his taste because of Grindelwald's old age. Thus, in order to protect his chastity, combined with his own ambitions, Riddle transformed into Voldemort. Snape's joining the Order of the Phoenix also seemed to be related to Dumbledore asking him to research a potion to conceive a child. Dumbledore hoped to have children with Grindelwald. The appearance of Riddle was also to make up for Dumbledore's regret that he had not succeeded in defeating Voldemort before one wants to believe it. But Ryan has laid the groundwork over the past hundreds of years. In order not to affect history, he used his magic to make these rumors disappear, but they were kept in mind. And now is the time for it to blossom and bear fruit. Hundreds of years of seemingly unrelated rumors are linked together. The real Dumbledore will emerge in the minds of wizards who know these rumors. In particular, Snape will inadvertently send a tried and true formula to Advanced Potionary, a potion that will enable boys to have children. Haha, I will be the one to stop the declining birth rate in the magic world. Who is the real savior? Tactical fate or waged Dumbledore, you old thief, take my arrow. See if you still dare to be Kate's idol. The past doesn't work either. At this moment, Professor McGonagall came back to her senses from a tabby cat to human form. The classroom suddenly became quiet again. She continued what she had said before and added, but now, there is a new type of animagus. The magic world calls it the incarnation of Fenrir. It can be infected with lycanthropy to gain the physique of a wolf and transform into a wolf. Even squibs can master magical abilities through it. This is a great advancement in the field of transfiguration, and perhaps one of you will find a way to transform a muggle into a wizard through human transformation in the future. Ryan below curled his lips. It is impossible for a muggle to become a real wizard. The wizards in this world are of very high quality. Even demigods and even divine wizards cannot do this. Dudley did not become a wizard, but merged with the soul of a wizard. However, the wizard who can apparently create natural phenomena but not distort reality, and is not a wizard, can be overcome by relying on the existing magic system. Animagus and where it might be headed due Friday morning, 1 foot long. Okay, get out of class is over. The sound of desks and chairs being cleared came from the classroom. After the other students and Professor McGonagall left, Ron complained, I really don't understand. Why does the divination class only accept students from one college? He was just about to meet Lavender to talk about his troubles. Let's go quickly. Look, divination is on the top of the North Tower. It takes us 10 minutes to walk there, Harry said after checking his schedule. Then he pulled Ron out of the classroom. I just found out why the others stopped following you, Harry. Neville trotted over from behind them. Why? Ron looked at Neville, looking forward to divination class. Of course. Professor Trelawney is the great-great-granddaughter of the famous fortune-teller Cassandra Trelawney. Harry agreed. Then he jumped up skillfully and dodged a staircase that suddenly disappeared. You should have known this in first grade. My grandmother was friends with Professor McGonagall. They all knew Professor Trelawney well. I think, well, Harry, you have to be prepared. Especially since you're so famous. What's wrong with Harry? Ginny looked at her brother. Don't ask me. Ron bit into a piece of kipper. You really shouldn't ask him. Neville looked at Harry and Ron sympathetically. Especially now, the other people around them kept casting furtive glances at the two of them, as if they were afraid that they would suddenly die. Ominous, and the worst omen in both Harry's and Ron's teacups, an omen of death. It's really strange. My grandmother said that Professor Trelawney has predicted the death of a student every year since she came to the school. But this time there were two. I know why. Ron muttered unhappily. Professor Trelawney disliked him and thought he was not a good match for Lavender. You know, Lavender was Trelawney's favorite student who was accepted as a disciple in the second year. Chapter 566 Shock Absorption Spell. After lunch, Ron disappeared again. While else he chose to return to the Ravenclaw common room to wait for the afternoon classes. Ron still stood firm in the hallway. He looked out at the large ship in the Black Lake in the distance, expecting to find Krum among the figures coming down from above. However, it seemed that Krum was also avoiding him. Ron still had no idea until Harry saw him in the Charms classroom. Ravenclaw schedule. I also asked what elective courses you took. Give it up, Ron, unless you're playing hooky. Or do you want to catch Krum? So, Krum can also read the Gryffindor timetable? Lavender. Ron looked as if he had suddenly realized something. He shouldn't have ignored his girlfriend by staring at Krum. He could keep an eye on Krum. But Krum can also steal home because of this. So Ron held Neville's hands tightly. "Thank you." Then the bell rang and Professor Flitwick jumped out from under the podium. Relying on his height advantage, he was hiding there just now. Seeing that the students did not do anything stupid while below he was away, he nodded with satisfaction. Standing on a pile of books stacked high on the ground, he briefly called the roll and began his reading. "Please turn to page 2 of Standard Spells, Level. The spell we are going to learn today is the Cushioning Charm, which you can also call the Cushion Charm, because it was originally used in the production of flying brooms to ensure that the person riding the broom feels more comfortable. Elio Smethwick invented this spell in 1820. Professor Flitwick paused and asked, "Then why is its technical term called the shock-absorbing charm, rather than the cushion charm?" Harry. Because what it does is actually create an invisible softening effect on the surface of the target. At Hogwarts, the very first Quidditch games were played on a surface that was cast with this spell. But under the leadership of more and more Gryffindor students, most students developed the bad habit of riding their brooms high up and then jumping down from the sky. Idea the floor height, which was previously only 10 feet, was extended to 80 feet. Harry, who was sitting in the last row, was also surprised to find that he was getting farther and farther away from the wall. Professor Flitwick waved the spell again, and the books piled behind him first grew larger, then bounced up, forming a circular staircase behind the students. Professor Flitwick waved his wand again. Cushioning Maxima. Harry touched the corners of the tables and chairs and the ground curiously. He was surprised to find that it was all springy, as soft as the most comfortable couch you could sink into. Feel the comfort of a Nimbus series broomstick. This is why wizards have the confidence to put their most vulnerable parts on a wooden stick. Professor Flitwick looked at Harry approvingly and said, "Very good, Harry has discovered it." The entire room was now under a dampening spell, the shock-absorbing spell for himself. So, in the following time, all the students in the classroom started jumping up and down. This place seems to have become a trampoline in the Muggle world. Even Ron, who was concerned about Lavender, was attracted by all this and devoted himself to the game. When the bell rang, everyone had not yet recovered from it. Even the foot-long paper assigned by Professor Flitwick failed to impress the crowd. He just watched reluctantly as Professor Flitwick restored everything to its original state. "Ron, where are you going?" Neville asked loudly as he watched Ron suddenly run away. "I'm going to the hall. Gryffindor has just finished a Care of Magical Creatures class." Ron replied casually and disappeared into the crowd. Neville looked at Harry. "Let's go to the first floor too. If Krum is really that jerk and is eyeing Lavender, Ron might run into him long time." So Harry and Neville also ran downstairs along the marble stairs. 10 minutes later, on the lawn of Black Lake, around the bright green Castuba students, Harry and Neville found Ron. Ron glanced at the big ship on the Black Lake in the distance in dismay. "I have a few questions for you. First of all, Parvati, you didn't tell Krum that Ron is Lavender's boyfriend." Parvati nodded in response. He agreed impatiently, "So what? Isn't Ron his friend? He must have known my identity a long time ago." Lavender paused. She noticed that Ron's expression had hardened. "Wait, you never mentioned me in front of Krum." Ron laughed dryly. "I thought you had already mentioned in your letter that you were my girlfriend, but Krum still pursued you relentlessly." Slightly they almost thought that Krum was a real bastard. But if that's the case, why does Krum keep avoiding Ron? Ron also thought of this question and turned to look at the ship. All three ignored Krum's mistaken belief that Ron was pursuing him. In the eyes of the three, as well as Lavender and Parvati, there was nothing wrong with Ron's performance. That hatred was obvious. People around them thought that Lavender was the unlucky one who was used as a shield and a victim. Naturally, there was no mention of it. So now, a new misunderstanding has arisen. Could it be that Krum already knows about the relationship between Lavender and Ron? So, for the sake of face, he never dared to show up in front of us. Harry analyzed. Neville, Ron, Lavender, and Parvati all agreed with this. "No, I must explain this to Krum." "Lavender, let me do it. Don't write a letter to explain to him." Ron's eyes were burning with fire. He thought it would be more appropriate for him to repair this broken relationship. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 567 Unexpected. Things in the world will not be changed by people's temperament. The same is true of Ron's enthusiasm, because no matter what, he had to meet Krum first or let go of that unreasonable stubbornness and choose to communicate by letter instead of meeting in person. Furthermore, next up is Hagrid's Care of Magical Creatures class. He didn't have time, so after Ron called Krum's name again and again outside the ship to no avail, Ron had no choice but to leave the ship. Harry and the others walked along the gently sloping towards Hagrid's cabin at the edge of the Forbidden Forest. On the other side, Krum on the big ship also breathed a sigh of relief. That damn Ron finally left. He had never imagined that Ron's love for him would be so intense. It even reaches the point where they don't care about their face and call their name outside lawn. Fortunately, Ron still has to go to class. After stroking the solid wooden table, he found the attachment filled with Ron's course schedule. Krum chuckled. Then he stood up and walked towards the door of his room. I have waited for the bell to ring. Then he could go out to the deck and bask in the sun. While Krum was waiting for the bell for class, Harry and the others arrived at Hagrid's cabin to say hello to the students in front of him. But the students around don't know the softness and cuteness beneath Aya's fierce appearance. They all took a few steps back involuntarily. Finally, Hagrid had to go back into the hut and put Fang inside. The sharp-eyed Harry spotted Hephaestus resting peacefully by the fire, and Alice Spade in the corner, who was now half the size of Ron between his legs and hid under the table. Harry also saw several familiar figures here. Dudley, his cousin. Ernie Macmillan, a guy with a physique comparable to Dudley and an incredibly hard-working man. Justin Finch-Fletchley is a guy who follows the crowd, but he is not a bad person. Harry then remembered that Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff had Care of Magical Creatures together. Neville had accidentally revealed before that he liked a Hufflepuff girl. Harry looked at the group of girls not far away. Susan Bones, the girl with a long braid hanging down her back, is the Minister of Magic. Ms. Bones, her aunt. Hannah Abbott, a blonde girl with 2 pigtails and eyes as round as gold galleons. In addition, there are Megan Jones and Lainey. Harry hardly spoke to either of them though. Neville was the same. So, that girl must be one of Susan and Hannah. Harry thought about this and followed Neville's gaze playfully. Sure enough, Neville was looking at one of them. If it wasn't for the fact that Susan and Hannah were so close that they were almost stuck together, Harry could even tell who the girl was by the way Neville was looking at her. Harry was about to step forward and trick Hannah and Susan into separating temporarily. He has that ability, under the influence of his newly awakened abilities. They would both believe, understand, and separate for a while. Then all he had to do was watch Neville's eyes. However, as the students approached, the deep and rich bell rang, signaling the start of class. Neville. But he immediately came to his senses again. Are they going to the Forbidden Forest? Harry couldn't help but get excited. Looking back at the first 2 times we entered the Forbidden Forest. The first time was because of an injured unicorn, and then he encountered Voldemort. Disappointed again, he found that Hagrid was only leading the way along the edge of the woods, and 5 minutes later they were outside a paddock-like area. There is nothing there. Everybody get over here to this fence. I have shouted. He took out a green book from his pocket that was struggling to bite someone. He slid his index finger down the spine of the book, and the book trembled, then opened and laid quietly in his hand. The students around couldn't help but exclaim. They could hardly wait to take out the monster book of monsters in their hands, which were wrapped in various ways such as tape or rope. Hagrid's hand. You've all done well, said Hagrid, relieved. So you all have your books. Now all you need are the magical creatures. Can you guess what magical creature we will learn about in this class? Here's a hint. The name starts with I'll go find them. Wait. Surprised Harry shook his shoulders and said expresslessly, I guess the Gryffindor and Slytherin in the last class gave him a little experience. But didn't you notice? He made us guess that what we learned in this class was almost useless. Did you mention extra points? And when the magical creatures come, won't we be able to see them? There is no need to guess. He is actually very disappointed with his friend. You know, the afternoon Hagrid taught them the magic of tree shepherds. They also practiced a Care of Magical Creatures class. Today, Hagrid didn't put in even half the effort he put in during the drill. Then you won't stutter when you speak. However, things did not develop as Harry had expected. Oh haha, you guessed wrong, brother. Ron jumped for joy. Not far away, Hagrid was walking back. The animals behind him, however, did not show up at all. A piece of black silk stood straight in the air. It covered everything about these animals, leaving no gaps. Hagrid smiled and winked at Harry. Chapter 568 Care of Magical Creatures Lesson. Regret. Very upset. Yet Harry couldn't help but feel delighted at Hagrid's performance. The second Hagrid greeted him, he guessed why. Now, nothing in the Forbidden Forest escapes Hagrid's eyes. Not to mention his complaints just now. There are two possibilities for this surprise. One was to use the experiment done by the Gryffindors and Slytherins in the previous class shouted, 5 points for guessing what today's class will be about. Is there anyone who wants to eat? Here I go. Hippocampus. Justin Finch-Fletchley quickly raised his hand and answered. Hi. Finch-Fletchley, you didn't just look at the name. I'm sorry, that's the wrong answer. Hagrid shook his head in disappointment. You're talking about a monster that's native to Greece and lives in the Mediterranean. Its head and front body are like a horse, while its tail and back body are like a big fish. This makes it look like a large seahorse. Of course, I do have the power to bring this rare and beautiful creature. But we are not at the lake now. Okay, next one. I hope it's more reliable than this. Hodag. Although its head looks like a frog, it can live on land. And it feeds on the moon beast. As far as I know, there are moon-crazed beasts in our woods. Ernie Macmillan raised his hand and answered. Very good. Hagrid clapped, but the Hufflepuff students around him had no time to be happy. He put away the smile on his face again and said, but you forgot one thing. You probably haven't heard that there are wizards in Britain who can stay awake for days and nights and still be full of energy. However, there are many in the United States. The Daily Prophet reported this last year. The secret lies in the regenerable horn of the sacred animal. If you take the powder made from it, you can stay awake for several days and nights. And there are no sequels. This also makes American wizards regard the sacred horned animals as a strategic resource. Want to get one, Alice? It's really difficult. I used to. Oh, okay, next one. I feel like you guys are getting closer to the answer. Ernie raised his hand again. But this time he seemed very confident. I know, the answer is actually horse. You are definitely here to expand our minds. Unicorns are magical creatures that are similar to horses, but this is another trap. Unicorns are all too common in the Forbidden Forest, and I discovered at yesterday's dinner that you have a very good relationship with Madame Maxime, the headmistress of Boxburton's. The horses that pulled Boxburton's carriage also disappeared, and there's only one answer. The creature starting with H you mentioned actually refers to the Abraxan. It also happens not to be available in the UK, rare enough, yet easy to get now. If you like wild animals, you will definitely choose this as the subject of your first class. Hagrid showed an expression of admiration on his face. The surrounding Hufflepuffs applauded this time. Even the Ravenclaw students almost couldn't help but join in the applause. Still, Hagrid shook his head. He said with a tone that was half admiration and half disappointment, this time it's really good that. If we had known that this was possible, we would have taught this lesson on the rune horse. I just saw that. When else you thought this guy was right, you subconsciously shook your head. You must have known. Everyone looked at Harry. Harry could only say, it's a hippogriff. The only thing I had about Ernie was that I knew Hagrid better. Ron, Draco, Neville, Ginny and I had warned him. So for the first class, he would definitely choose a magical creature from category XXX, which capable wizards can handle. And Hagrid liked wild animals. I also thought about Pegasus, the tail horse Icer and Grayling Thestral. But Hagrid always liked to be direct. This puzzle certainly doesn't beat around the bush. So it can only be a hippogriff. Hagrid couldn't help wiping away his tears. 10 points for Ravenclaw. For knowing me so well, Harry, to say you're wrong. Hagrid pulled off the black curtain and whistled. With the sound of a whistle, the creatures behind the curtain appeared. There are 12 in total. They were coming towards them. They have the bodies, hind legs and tails of horses, but their front legs, wings and heads are those of eagles, with steel-colored beaks and large, bright orange eyes. The claws on their front legs are half a foot long and look lethal. There was nothing to restrain them. Then another whistle sounded. Even although there were no hand gestures or chains or other restraints, these creatures, which looked like they were not easy to deal with, obediently came to the fence where the whole class was standing. Little. Because this fence hardly gave people a sense of security. They are beautiful, aren't they? Look at their shiny, sparkling fur. And each one is different. This is Buckbeak, in stormy gray. This is bronze in color. This is a pink piebald color. This is a sparkling reddish brown. This is inky black. Hagrid introduced the names of each of the hippogriffs one by one. What was even more surprising, however, was when Hagrid approached. They all lowered their proud heads obediently. You know, the hippogriff is a very proud and easily tempered magical creature. When dealing with it, it must act first. If it is made to feel offensive, it can be hurtful, but Hagrid did nothing. Moreover, when they were pulled against the fence and watched by the students, they did not feel the slightest bit of offense or dissatisfaction. This is far beyond being tamed. All ignorant magical creatures will be controlled by it. I didn't need to keep them chained. Matter how strong the chains in the material world are, they cannot compare to Hagrid's control over the minds of these creatures. Hypnosis, not cheating, but be grateful, because by getting rid of the animal nature, we gain true sober gratitude and then willingly be dominated. Chapter 569, Our Reversal Spell. During the Care of Magical Creatures class in the corner of the library, sunlight shines through the lush leaves and glass onto the table, leaving behind spots the size of gold galleons. Kate sat in Ryan's arms. A clock outlined with the golden threads faintly visible in her little palm was ticking away. There was a crackling sound of electricity, and the clock disappeared into the air. The sun rose again in the east, the open buds closed again, the colorful ballfish in the black lake fell backwards against the current, and the mark left by the sunlight shining through the obstruction on the table slowly disappeared, just like a movie rewound, and everything went back 2 or 3 hours ago. This hour reversal charm is so troublesome. Well, my stomach is also uncomfortable. Kate pouted and rubbed her head against Ryan's chest. It's not really a full-fledged spell in and of itself. Rather than calling it a spell, it would be better to say that it is a way to activate the sands of time. To be precise, time has never been controlled by modern wizards. Ryan comforted. But, Kate turned over the patch in her hand. The hour reversal charm is a dangerous and unstable spell. It can be used to go back in time within 5 hours. According to Professor Saul Crocker, this spell was incorporated into the Time Turner because the unstable spell worked better when stored in a magical container. Mysteries, how can they think so? Also, how I don't need a wand, and Ryan, the sands of time you mentioned can perform the hour reversal spell. Ryan smiled oddly. This is all because you have something higher than the sands of time in your body, my body fluids. Don't you feel your stomach getting hot when you use it? So I often recommend that you take it orally. After all, there are no digestive organs in your lower abdomen, unlike a stomach. Without my help in digestion, it would continue to recover like an eternal potion, inheriting some of my characteristics, before losing its activity. What was the sand back then? Kate quickly changed the subject. Ryan stretched out his right hand, and it seemed to be connected to something, and golden sands emerged from the air. It's something like dandruff that has been multiplying since Cronus died. The initial hour reversal spell is divided into 2 steps. The first step is to connect to Cronus and dig out the sand of time. The second step is to use one's own magic power to activate it and indirectly control his power. However, the current Ministry of Magic, there are no longer any wizards who can refine the sands of time. So, if the Ministry of Magic's time turners are destroyed, how can they be recreated? I guess I'll have to wait until the next wizard can use the initial version of the hour reversal spell. Is this the sand of time? Kate wanted to touch it, but when she thought of its origin, she took her hand back. But if the Ministry of Magic doesn't have wizards who can extract the sands of time, then why are time turners not taken seriously at all? Before you take the name of Cronus, any little wizard can apply to use it as long as the professor approves. What if the sands of time in the time turner run out? It's not expendable. It's just the medium. The time converter consumes magic power, not the sand. Ryan shook his head. A flame ignited from the palm of his hand, burning the fine sand and disappearing into the air on the other side. At the right time point another Ryan was riding a hippogriff with Hermione, flying over the Forbidden Forest. Unlike the original world line, Hagrid, who is able to fully control all the hippogriffs, release them from their restraints. All students can ride them. To fly just before riding them, students need to master the normal way to win the hippogriff's approval. Look straight without blinking, bow, and get approval. Afterwards, almost all the students surrounded these hippogriffs one by one. Ryan and Hermione took over Bababack. The same goes for other students ever. Except for some Ravenclaw students. They thought today's charms class wasn't bad either. On the way back to the castle, everyone had to pass through the lawn and the Black Lake again. Ron, who was not far away, stopped there again and looked at the big ship moored by the lake from afar. However, this time his eyes changed and were no longer filled with hatred. It's a complex emotion that's a bit like guilt. Crumb. I'm Ron. He roared again. Inside the big ship, Crumb leaned against the door tightly. his arms and legs clean, a ferocious beast outside that was about to rush straight through the gate. For the first time, fear appeared on his usually stiff, expressionless, grayish face. You know, even when facing Grindelwald, there was no emotion on this face. Krum breathed hard. Ron, when will you let me go? In this state, being harassed by a wizard, he had no face to pursue Lavender. So, until now, he has not taken the initiative to write a letter to Lavender. Do not write to Krum to explain because of Ron's words. Let me do it all. It seems that this misunderstanding is doomed to be unresolved. Ryan smiled at that. He took Hermione and walked towards the castle. He couldn't imagine that this was not a prank he had drafted. It was just a misunderstanding caused by chance, and it has not been exposed until now. Common room. He was working with Penelope on the student union's documents. The library on the second floor had thousands of bookshelves and hundreds of narrow passages, among which he and Kate were walking in the shadows. Opposite him, who was holding Hermione's hand, came another version of himself, arm in arm with Luna. It was as if he was traveling through several parallel worlds at the same time. And at this moment they intersected. But unfortunately, his brain clearly denied this emotional sigh. These are the human figures he travels in the outside world. They are just his hands and feet, an outward extension. The real him is in Smith's alchemy hut deep in the real Smith castle on the display stand with his name engraved on it. In addition to the shadow of the Black Knight, there was also a bronze coffin engraved with flowing runes, and he was sleeping inside. This is a magical ritual in itself. His body, soul, and even his ethereal will be strengthened by the runes flowing on the surface of the bronze coffin. This bronze coffin is the call of the times. Body transformation level 6, 77%. Combined with alchemy to create a practice method. Thanks to Taishi Yumexu for the monthly ticket and other classmates for the recommendation and subscription. Chapter 570, Mortal Rat. At 6 o'clock in the Great Hall, Harry looked at the Hufflepuff table curiously. This time he wasn't there to see who Neville liked. Instead, I have noticed that the current Hufflepuff students seemed very excited. Ron was also attracted and turned his head. I know. Neville's voice suddenly sounded from behind the two of them. It almost scared them. Neville just disappeared after class. Harry suspected at the time that he was seeing the girl. Obviously this must be true, otherwise how would he know what happened to Hufflepuff? But Harry didn't care too much about it now. By a rat. What rat? Ron heard and quickly moved his hand away from Scabbers' belly. He would probably have to lie in the dormitory like this all day. Because his roommates don't want to talk to him. Stop talking. Ginny covered her mouth. She had just run to Harry's side when she heard such exciting news. Whose mouth is vomiting all over the floor? Seamus from Gryffindor came over. Hermione, who was sitting next to Ryan, stood up and said, if you read the Monster Book of Monsters, you wouldn't say that. The murtlap is an animal that looks similar to a mouse, but has anemone-like growths on its back. This creature can be found along the coast of the United Kingdom. People bitten by the mortal rat will experience retching symptoms, but in more severe cases, sparks will come out of the patient's anus, but it will not last for more than 48 hours. Oh, it's the mouth on top. Seamus didn't care. What about his ugly ear hair? Ron said after looking at Zacharias with disgust. Neville then said, he ate his pet's growth. He just ate too much at once. What? Why would anyone eat that? Dean popped up a little confused. He wants to become stronger by eating those growths. He was clearly very proud of his Hufflepuff heritage. But yesterday he was taught a lesson by Dudley, a muggle-born wizard whom he looked down upon. Neville said slowly. However, the tone actually revealed a little bit of understanding. Just to be able to resist the curse. Ron expressed his confusion. Neville explained, a curse is a spell cast with malicious intent. While increasing resistance to curses, one's own resistance to spells is also enhanced. This is why the mortal rat is so precious, and ordinary wizards can't even hope to get one. Ron stroked his chin, looking thoughtful. Is that why he's still acting so cocky? Even after such a disgraceful incident, he still had ear hair? Why doesn't he remove his ear hair? Can't it be cured? That's not right. I looked at his butt for a long time, but there were no sparks. Neville couldn't help laughing and said, haha. Didn't he become more resistant to curses? These ear hairs are also a part of him, connected to his eardrum and nerves. It cannot be removed physically directly. It can only be removed with potions. But the potion's effect was also weakened in him. So he'll have to live with his ear hairs for at least a week. Wait, I have a question. Isn't mortal rat juice very cheap? It has healing properties for cuts and scrapes and can also relieve pain. In the potion shop, compared with similar products, it is only 1 coppernet more expensive. Dean asked quickly. Ever since he and EJ met during the holidays, he spent almost all his free time hanging out in the Leaky Cauldron in Diagon Alley. Therefore, he was also familiar with the potion shop at the entrance of Diagon Alley. He was more or less familiar with the prices of the potion ingredients sold there. Neville was briefly surprised at Dean's knowledge of prices. Then he said, Madra rat juice is actually an extract from its anemone-like growths. Its proliferation recovers quickly. It can be said that as long as you raise 2 or 3 Madra rats, you can supply the consumption of a potion shop. Ace for Harry. He narrowed his eyes at Neville's familiarity with the situation. The Zacharias thing is interesting though. But it wouldn't be to the extent that Neville knew about the proliferation of the Madra rats to this extent. So the source of this information must be that girl is a relative of the owner of the Leaky Cauldron, and after hearing news about wizards from all over the world, she has developed a habit of listening to gossip. She even once said that she wanted to inherit the Leaky Cauldron, just for the gossip. So, after Neville proudly finished talking about Zacharias and answered questions from the students around him, Harry stood up, waved at Neville, and mouthed, Hannah. Then he whispered to Ron, you are very tired today and want to have a good chat with Lavender. Just let me and Ginny go first. You don't go back to the lounge before 8 o'clock. After a moment, Ron's pupils lost focus. The next second it returned to normal. He shook his head and walked over to the Gryffindor table. There Lavender was discussing today's Transfiguration class with Parvati. Then, Harry took Ginny out of the hall later, in the Ravenclaw common room. Sofa next to the fireplace. Harry leaned against it with his eyes closed. Seems to be waiting for someone. But Ginny was not around. The door to the lounge opened and Neville walked straight over and sat down next to Harry. He whispered, Harry, how did you know it was her? Harry opened his eyes. Do you know, when I was fighting you, I discovered something. My magic is eluding you. From my perspective, if magic is electricity, then your body is like an insulator. That's when I knew it. Only you can. You just need to. Chapter 571 The Professor's Strange Reactions. There are portraits everywhere in Hogwarts, and they are also Dumbledore's best spies. Harry once asked Ryan where he could avoid surveillance. Ravenclaw's common room is one of them. As for Neville, Harry discovered something unique about him. He would serve as insurance against Harry's lies. He knows nothing. He only knew that Harry needed to leave Hogwarts temporarily at that time. Now all Harry had to wait for was Dumbledore's announcement receiving private instruction. Time soon came to the next day. Harry was disappointed though, because he didn't receive any notification last night. It's as if individual teaching never existed in the first place. This morning's classes were potions and transfiguration. It is dangerous in itself, so it is not very suitable for students in grades 1 and 2 to master it. However, the content of the Hogwarts potions class from grades 1 to 3 is 1000 magical herbs and fungi and magic potions and liquids. So before the class even started, almost half of the students in the classroom knew its ingredients: sneezeweed, scurvy and lovage. So, even Dudley, who is not good at potions, succeeded in making the confusion easily medicine. Light blue, very close to the perfect green. But Harry noticed that Professor Snape kept frowning, as if he was worried about something. Even Ron noticed this phenomenon. Snape actually repeated his words twice when praising you, Harry. This is not magic. The Transfiguration class after Potions class only lasted for 1 class period, just like yesterday's Charms class. Divination and Ancient Magic only has 1 class period. Transfiguration classes will only have 2 classes in the last class of the week. The subject of Transfiguration class today is no longer animagus. It seemed to have only been mentioned yesterday. The specific steps on how to become an animagus will not be discussed here. Today we are going to learn how to turn a clock into snail dead things in the 1st and 2nd grades. What you need to learn is how to eliminate the characteristics of dead things. Taking the content of our school today as an example, the snail you conjure up should be able to move, there should be no sound of clock hands turning, and there should be no similar patterns or other clock features on its body. Later on, you can learn how to turn a teapot into a turtle and a steamer into a rabbit. Harry noticed that Professor McGonagall was often distracted today. He seems to be thinking about something. This made Harry very curious. What happened to the professors at Hogwarts? But by noon, Harry still hadn't found anything. The Hufflepuff students who were communicating were still discussing what happened to Zacharias yesterday. What? 3 classes this afternoon. Care of magical creatures, ancient runes and charms. We have to learn all that new stuff all day Saturday, can be seen from the fact that he chose to go back to the common room after dinner instead of going to the Black Lake to harass Krum again. If it were him yesterday, he would have said, "What's wrong with those students from other schools? We clearly have tables prepared for them in our auditorium." But no one came to the auditorium to eat. They are all in their own boats, trees, carriages. And Krum was far away in the big ship on the Black Lake. He was smiling happily because he didn't hear Ron's voice. But he still didn't leave the room and go to the deck. He was afraid that Ron was deliberately hiding and waiting for him without making any noise. Ron has classes this afternoon. He has time to go out and play. Maybe you can even go to the library. This is Hogwarts, the most comprehensive library of magical knowledge in all of Europe. Voldemort also draws nourishment from here in the afternoon. This time the class was held next to Hagrid's cabin. He smiled and said, "Today we are going to learn about a very common creature, but one you have definitely never seen before. To capture it, wizards invented many spells. They are also very common in duels. For example, the psychic charm." He paused, looked at the students and said, "Can you guess what it is? Could it be an invisible beast?" Justin Finch-Fletchley rubbed his eyes. He changed his position several times to observe the high stool next to Hagrid, trying to find something on it. "Yes, Finch-Fletchley, you have made great progress. But you overlooked one thing, it just doesn't fit the description of being very common," Hagrid said in surprise. "Ball escape bird? Although it is considered extinct by Muggles, it has always been there and is very common. It is difficult to detect due to its ability to suddenly disappear and reappear in another place. It's very hard for wizards to catch it. They actually invented a lot of spells for it." Ernie guessed. Hagrid shook his head. "It just disappears. I should have clearly hinted that it was on the stool." "Ernie, your answer this time is not as close as Finch-Fletchley's. Could it be a giant color-changing snail? I've seen it in magical creatures shops. It should be very common." This time it was Dudley who answered the question. Dudley is still frightened by the incident when Hagrid turned him into a pig's tail, barely said a word in Care of Magical Creatures, and the same thing happened with Hagrid. You knew Dudley wasn't a bad boy now because of this. He had been avoiding eye contact with Dudley, so, facing Dudley's answer, he was stunned for a moment, then said, "Your answer is wrong, but you didn't grow up in the magical world after all. I don't know which magical creature can be considered common. Color-changing giant snails are only commonly found in magical creatures. But in nature, they can only be found in Africa." Thanks to Taishi Yumasilk and Shumangdang Halo for their monthly tickets, and other classmates for their recommendations and subscriptions. Chapter 572, Runic Number 7. The moke is a silvery green lizard found throughout Britain and Ireland. It can grow up to 10 inches in length. The shape-shifting lizard has never been discovered by Muggles because it has the ability to shrink its body at will. Just now it has become so small that it is invisible to your naked eyes, and has been observing you on the high stool. And why does it wizard so much that they even invent spells for it? This is because its shed skin is a valuable material that can be used to make wallets or purses. The wallet made of shape-shifting lizard skin can shrink when a stranger approaches, so it is difficult to be discovered once the owner puts the item into the bag. Only he or she can take it out, so you understand owning a shape-shifting lizard means an inexhaustible vein of gold. Hagrid's words undoubtedly made the eyes of the little wizards in the audience seem to turn into the shape of gold galleons. They are all in the 3rd grade, 14 or 15 years old. You can go to Hogsmeade now. I am no longer a child who doesn't know how expensive firewood, rice, oil and salt are. According to Hagrid, it seems that as long as you have such a deformed lizard, you will be rich and free. Now, even Ron, a guy with a bulging wallet, couldn't help but look up and down at the deformed lizard, but Harry found that Hagrid didn't care about all this. He looked confident. Hagrid saw Ron couldn't help but take a few steps forward and laughed. "You kids are so naive. Many of your graduating seniors have had the same plans as you have now. Become a professional lizard hunter. But most of them failed and had to look for jobs. The successful ones don't need to rely on these little lizards to make money. Even I was able to catch this cunning little cutie with my own unique trick during your last school year." Last school year. Harry understood immediately. That's when Hagrid wakes up. This is how Hephaestus was born. However, Harry noticed that Hagrid and Snape were different from Professor McGonagall as usual. Now, My plan to talk to Hagrid after class about what happened was ruined. The following time is the interaction between Hagrid and the shape-shifting lizard named Lexus. Hagrid's permission when the get-out-of-class bell rings because there will be ancient magic and spells classes coming up. Harry and the others waved goodbye to Hagrid and walked towards the castle. As they passed the library on the second floor, a group of chattering girls passed by them. One of them had a Bulgarian scarf tied around his waist, and Harry was surprised to find that when he was about to go upstairs, Ron suddenly turned around and ran towards the group of girls. "You, scarf crumb." When Harry walked in, I heard Ron saying this to the girl wearing a Bulgarian scarf. When the girl saw that the person she was chatting up was Ron, who is very famous in the school, the impatience on her face quickly turned into friendliness. "You really are with Crumb?" I mean. "Yeah. I got this scarf from Crumb. Ask him if he still has it." "He's gone." There were some Durmstrang students there too. They're all cool. Too bad there are still some Boxburton's bitches. This is Hogwarts, they are not welcome. It's incredible that there are so many students in the library. I was wondering why I never see them on weekdays. So they all went to the library. After getting rid of those girls, Ron complained as he walked to the ancient magic classroom on the 4th floor. He thought it was unfair. They are Ravenclaws because they have their own library in the common room. I rarely go to the library, otherwise he would have known Crumb's movements long ago. Maybe he bumped into Crumb yesterday, explained the misunderstanding, and played with him all day. Again, maybe we can fly a broom together after dinner. The ancient magic rune class, like the divination class, only accepts students from one academy only. They were Ravenclaws. The professor's name is Bathsheba Baburin. Harry had seen her before, at the start of term and at the end of year dinner. She looked Indian, with a monocle embroidered with tulips. Her makeup and dress all have a strong Far Eastern flavor. If Padma had chosen the ancient rune, she would probably have found it very familiar. However, this class was much more boring than Harry had imagined. After a brief roll call, Professor Baburin handed out the ancient runes simple introduction borrowed from the library. He started teaching ancient runic numbers directly. Demigods. This animal's invisibility symbolizes 0, unicorn. The horn of this animal symbolizes 1, Grafhorn. The horns of this animal represent 2, Runespore. This 3-headed creature symbolizes 3, Fwooper. This creature has feathers that can be 4 different colors, thus symbolizing 4, Quintaped. This 5-legged creature symbolizes 5, Salamander. This creature can live up to 6 hours after leaving the fire, hence the symbol of 6, as this most magical number remains a mystery. The symbol for unknown represents 7. This creature with 8 eyes symbolizes 8, couldn't sit still anymore. Professor, can you tell me what kind of magical creature this unknown is? Is it just to represent it with the unknown? Harry's voice suddenly sounded in the classroom where only the rustling sound of writing could be heard. Professor Babbling adjusted his monocle and looked Harry up and down. This question. Well, a student also asked me this question decades ago. But he was in private. You may also know this student. His name is Tom Riddle. You're Professor Riddle's father. Harry's eyes widened. He knew that the student was referring to Voldemort. What do you think of when you first hear the number 7? If you have ever been to church, you might first think of the 7 deadly sins: pride, envy, wrath, laziness, greed, gluttony, and lust, and the corresponding 7 virtues: chastity, diligence, generosity, humility, gentleness, temperance, and tolerance. They are something that every human or wizard possesses. Anthony quickly asked, but we are wizards. Wizards are magical creatures too. The most mysterious of magical creatures. Chapter 573, Charms and a Number of Horcruxes. So, a wizard is a mysterious creature that symbolizes the number 7. But this is just my personal opinion. Okay, any more questions? A flash of lightning suddenly flashed through Harry's mind. He raised his hand quickly. When did Professor Riddle's father ask this question? Apparently, it was also in 3rd grade. After his first Ancient Runes class. There are 7 Horcruxes. Harry's heart was in turmoil. As soon as the get-out-of class was over and they left the classroom, Ron couldn't help but complain to Harry, if I had known I wouldn't have chosen Ancient Runes. I might as well teach myself. This professor only knows how to highlight the key points. There will be a charms class later. But Harry ignored him. Still thinking about the Horcruxes. If Voldemort really created that many Horcruxes, then he must have made some modifications to the magic of Horcruxes. He was able to create 7 Horcruxes without affecting his own skills, but instead made them stronger. This must be the 7 deadly sins mentioned by Professor Baburin: pride, envy, wrath, sloth, greed, gluttony and lust. I can now confirm that the locket contains lust. I felt it myself, Bella. But other Horcruxes, Harry thought as he followed the other students to the charms classroom on the 4th floor. Behind him, Ron followed with a pout and a sulky look on his face. Like a bullied little girl. Soon, we arrived at the classroom. Perhaps because the charms class and ancient magical runes were connected as a class, 2 courses combined into 1 class hour, they saw Professor Flitwick as soon as they stepped into the classroom. He was about to hide behind the table again. But Harry and the others happened to catch them, so he could only stand on the book with a wry smile to cover up this embarrassment. Before the bell rang, seeing that all the students had arrived, Professor Flitwick eagerly announced the start of the charms class. The spells we are going to learn today are also related to Quidditch. Every time the chasers lost the ball, they became more annoyed because they had to keep sprinting to the ground to retrieve it. So, after the game, the quaffle was changed to red. Soon after the color change, the wizard Daisy Penide came up with the idea of casting a spell on the quaffle so that if it was not caught, it would slowly fall to the ground as if it were sinking in water, and the chaser could catch it in midair. This spell is called the slowing charm. Its mantra is Arresto Momentum. Please repeat: shock reduction and speed stop. Shock reduction to stop speed. Hand, it's the most famous Quidditch team in Northern Ireland. It has won the Quidditch League Cup 27 times so far, making it the 2nd most successful team in the history of the Quidditch League Cup. Butterbeer repeated the slogan. It's great, but unfortunately this isn't a flying lesson for me. Belicusal Batsace Finbar Quigley is known for jumping off his broomstick after catching the golden snitch. Then use the slowing spell on yourself. Slowly landed on the ground amid the cheers of the audience. Well, you should know what I will do. We're going to the Quidditch pitch, said Ron. He looked like he had been hit in the head with a ball. I felt dizzy because of the sudden surprise. I'm sorry, I said this wasn't a flying lesson. This is a charms class. You have to imagine what I can create with magic. Extension. Cushioning maxima. Strong shock absorbing spell. Under Professor Flitwick's magic, the classroom returned to the state of the last spells class. Okay, but this time you're going to practice the slowing spell. Slow down your descent before you hit the ground, Professor Flitwick continued. After class, everyone, exhausted from playing again, reluctantly walked out of the charms classroom. The Ravenclaw students were divided into 2 columns. A group of people chose to go directly to the auditorium on the 1st floor and wait for dinner to start. The other column chose to go back to the lounge to take a shower first. Harry and Ron were among those heading back to the common room. Ginny, and found out that Hannah did have a crush on Neville. Harry, why did you ignore me just now? Ron came back to his senses from the joy of the charms class and thought about what happened just now. Me. Harry pulled Ron towards the corner. Alchemy will be taught on Saturday, and Sunday is when we go to Hogsmeade. We haven't been there during the day yet. Unfortunately, Dumbledore hasn't informed me yet. Dumbledore probably hadn't studied the technique of voice transmission. I've only seen it at Ryan's. Okay, what I want to talk about is the Horcruxes, the secret of Voldemort's immortality. We have encountered 2 Horcruxes so far, the Diary, Professor Riddle, and the Slytherin locket. He knows the identity of another Horcrux, himself. But he wasn't going to tell Ron about it, but he might not have been prepared to tell him. I heard about the origin of the diary from Draco. This was his father's token of allegiance to Dumbledore. But do you know what Voldemort told Draco's father? Say it's a weapon and give it to a Hogwarts student if necessary away, rather than throwing it into the path of someone else and risking destruction, which actually happens. The diary becomes Professor Riddle, Voldemort's enemy. What does this mean? This means that Voldemort may have made, or is planning to make, more Horcruxes, Harry said, trying to hide his excitement. So, there are 7 of them. Ron thought of the question in Harry's rune class. Thanks to you Mentonglo for the monthly ticket and other classmates for the recommendation and subscription. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 574 Dumbledore's Suspicion. While Harry and Ron were talking in the corner on the 5th floor. At this moment, in Snape's dimly lit room, which looked like Frankenstein's laboratory, with many large glass jars filled with various sticky and disgusting animal and plant organs placed on the shelves along the wall. For the first time, it became lively. Snape stood beside a glass jar containing the big eyeball, his mouth twitching in displeasure. Not far away, on the usually empty floor, there was a sofa that could seat several Hagrids. Several people were sitting on the sofa, holding letters in their hands and looking at Snape from time to time. Sitting on the far left was a serious-looking woman wearing square glasses and her dark hair pulled into a tight bun. Next to her was a short and stocky witch with a patched hat on her flowing hair and a lot of dirt on her clothes and nails. On the far right is a surprisingly short wizard with pointy ears, who seems to have goblin ancestry. In the middle of the sofa was a handsome wizard who was dressed fashionably and looked out of place here. They all seemed to want to say something, but subconsciously looked towards the center of the room, where Snape usually worked. Sitting on that chair was an old man with white hair and beard and fancy clothes. There is no doubt that he is Dumbledore. The person sitting on the sofa was obviously Minerva McGonagall, the deputy headmistress of Hogwarts and the Transfiguration teacher. The next is Sprout. Professor Flitwick. Middle is Sirius Black. Someone who would never have set foot in this room in his entire life. In his words, "This place reeks of cowardly, disgusting snot." The same goes for other professors. They usually talk together in the staff lounge or the principal's office. To be honest, the style here is really not to their liking. But today, a piece of news brought them all here. Innovation and Transfiguration Today often commission articles from them and seek their opinions on publication. Sirius Black was the owner of the Daily Prophet, the largest newspaper in Britain, so he could also see the content in advance. And now, they all received letters. Wonder if he accidentally offended Professor Snape. So much so that this potion formula with multiple testing data was chosen to be published in Advanced Potion, a tabloid established in recent years, instead of them. Because of the name and content of the formula, everyone gathered here to ask Snape, "Severus, the recipe's real?" According to the recipe, mandrake juice, phoenix feathers, fairy wings, genetic material from both wizards, and a little Peruvian viper-tooth dragon venom. Dumbledore put down the parchment in his hand. He rubbed his crooked nose and looked at Snape. "It was just a boring recipe I found in a corner storage cupboard. Although I have not checked, the patch is very new and can be seen to have been written very recently. A prank by some bored student. If only meant I hadn't accidentally put it in the letter I wrote to Advanced Pharmacy. I'll probably just throw it in the fireplace and burn it." Snape shook his head. "But Pomona and I have heard for a long time that you were researching a potion for Dumbledore and Grindelwald to make boys fertile. Also, Advanced Pharmacy is just a new publication. Why are you writing to it?" Professor McGonagall shook her head. She and Professor Pomfrey looked at each other, then at Dumbledore and Snape. They all suspected that this was collusion, which made them a little angry. So what if it's true? Came here out of curiosity to eat some melons. But Snape actually used such a ridiculous lie to deal with them. "I also heard this rumor when I was in Azkaban. From an old man's mouth. He was caught secretly selling banned potion ingredients. He once mentioned that Snape, the head of Slytherin, had asked him about a muggle fish, the clownfish, a fish that can change from male to female and reproduce with male fish, and wanted to buy one for research." Sirius grinned. "Weren't we very busy during the recent summer vacation? Grindelwald was also at Hogwarts at that time. Professor Flitwick added. "Well, I didn't give Professor Snape any personal missions. The problem now is the explosive population growth and subsequent impact caused by the revelation of the potion formula in Advanced Potion. We need to contact the Ministry of Magic in advance. In order to prevent the situation from developing in a bad direction, some forward-looking policies should be issued in advance. And Sirius, I hope that after the release of Advanced Potion, you will cooperate with Professor Snape to publish the paper he wrote after his research on this formula. Severus, are you okay? Make a batch of this potion and write an article about it." Dumbledore waved his hand, his tone a little distant at first, and then became a little intimate. "Snape. It's really Severus who has something to do, and Professor Snape who has nothing to do." Even if Snape really didn't mean that. But he couldn't help but feel aggrieved by Dumbledore's sudden change in tone and wording. McGonagall and the other two saw that they couldn't get any more information. They said hello and disappeared from the room. "This formula was really not researched by you." Dumbledore looked at Snape with suspicion. "Why don't you doubt your lover old? Maybe this is a hint from him to you. Giving you a child as compensation." Snape said unhappily. "Hiss. Snape's words and sat back in his chair. This is indeed very likely. He just suspected Snape because when it comes to potion skills, Snape is the best in the entire Hogwarts. But he had forgotten Grindelwald. Among Grindelwald's saints, there are also many talented people. Their goal is for wizards to enslave muggles. The impact of this potion is to reduce the declining birth rate in the wizarding world. It is also a tonic that increases the strength of wizards. And Grindelwald did still have feelings for him. Of course, he has a little bit of that, too. Chapter 575 Dumbledore's Notice. The ceiling of the Great Hall was blue, with a few light clouds floating in it, just like the sky outside the tall, mullioned windows. Harry and Ron tied their porridge, eggs and ham while they told Draco about yesterday's conversation. Professor Riddle is the Horcrux and can be considered another Voldemort. He must know what you are thinking and may have told Dumbledore. Draco frowned and said after thinking. Draco's words gave Ron inspiration. He put down the spoon in his hand and said, "That's right, brother." And Voldemort might not have had time to create so many Horcruxes. Before going to Harry's house, he didn't think about failure. When Ron and Draco were communicating. "Harry. Hey, Harry." A voice rang out. Harry turned his head and his heart skipped a beat. It was Colin Creevey, the guy who had become famous at Hogwarts in his first year by selling scuba gear and who idolized him so much that he wanted his picture taken. Later, because Harry couldn't be photographed, he returned to normal. Could it be that Colin was crazy about him again? Colin was running toward him now, a roll of parchment in his hand. "For you," Colin panted. "I ran into Dumbledore on my way out of the common room, and he sent me to give this to you. I don't know if I can take a picture with you. My younger brother Dennis will be attending school next year. I have told him many stories about you. And he said he was your friend. But Dennis kept saying I was lying, saying you were from Ravenclaw and had nothing to do with me, a Gryffindor student. Oh, what a shame. I wish I could get into Ravenclaw. But my brother still has a chance." After finishing a long sentence in one breath, he raised a camera that he had taken out from somewhere with an expectant look on his face. He looked at Harry pleadingly. "Maybe I could stand next to you and ask your friend to press it for you? Then, could you please sign your name?" "Okay," Harry said, thinking that might satisfy Colin. So as not to let Colin become unsatisfied and brainwash his younger brother. If Colin's brother Dennis got into Ravenclaw, then Harry found the horrible thought. Finally, Ron picked up the camera and took a photo of him and Colin, who was shaking with excitement. After Colin left, Harry quickly unfolded the patch, and Ron and Draco also came over. "Dear Harry, I plan to start giving you private lessons this Saturday. Please come to my office at 8 p.m. I hope you have a great first day of school. Yours faithfully, Albus Dumbledore. P.S. I like sour soda." "Do I like sour soda?" said Ron, reading the text over Harry's shoulder with a puzzled look on his face. "Did I hear correctly? Saturday at 8 o'clock? Alchemy. 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. War Magic starts at 7 p.m. Group Potions starts at p.m. So your entire Saturday is booked. Today is Wednesday and there is only one class in the morning, History of Magic." During class, Professor Binns walked through the blackboard and entered the classroom as usual. Later, began to hold a small meeting in the corner. Guess what Dumbledore would teach Harry? Ron thought it was probably some special spells and magic that the Death Eaters didn't know about. As the son of an Auror, Neville directly pointed out that these things were illegal. Although a wizard of Dumbledore's strength would not be bound by so-called laws, he is not that kind of person. Magic class, Neville disappeared again. Harry and Ron returned to the common room and began to do their homework from yesterday's charms class. However, not long after he finished writing, Ron pulled his homework and showed it to Harry. "Harry, look, the spell arresto momentum may be composed of two words. The former comes from the French word arrestor, which was used in Norman England, meaning to stop, and the latter comes from the Latin momentum, which means driving force. I don't have any problem with that." Harry had just finished his homework thanks to Ron's joining in. The bell for the 2 herbal medicine classes in the afternoon range. They hurried along the familiar path to the greenhouse outside the castle. Various plants with magical powers are cultivated there. It has always been used by Professor Sprout in his herbology class. After carefully following the flow of people through the vegetable field, the greenhouse appeared before them to look for Neville when they saw Professor Sprout striding across the "Today we are at Greenhouse 3. The students whispered with great interest. They were all familiar with the layout of the greenhouse to approach. After everyone found their seats, the teacher said, "Today we are going to peel the beans from the bubble pods and put them into the wooden bucket next to your legs. Now, who can tell me what properties the bubble pods have?" Hermione unexpectedly raised her hand. Bubble pods can fire or hurl beans at living creatures. Their beans are amazing and will bloom immediately once they come into contact with something solid. Trolls are allergic to them. Hermione's answer also made Harry discover Ryan. He was looking at Hermione in surprise. Apparently he hadn't expected Hermione to answer the question so suddenly. In the early days of school, Hermione really enjoyed answering questions. Ron, who had once shown his affection for Hermione in front of Harry, had almost forgotten about Hermione. Professor Sprout smiled and nodded. "Very good, 10 points for Ravenclaw. Because of this characteristic of the bubble pods, you need to close your eyes when approaching them. They discover you because you look at them. When you get close to shell the beans, be careful not to wear gloves and touch these shiny beans with your hands. Use your hands as magical creatures to prevent it from blooming. Then they are placed in wooden barrels made from wood from the Dharmakan tree." End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.